Hi, I'm Andrea Sparks, and I'm the director of the Child Sex Trafficking Team for Governor Abbott here in Texas, and just delighted to have so many of you with us today. I'm going to mention some things later, but I wanted to just say hello and welcome and give you a few housekeeping tips before I turn it over to our hosts. So panelists, just a reminder that you want to turn off your video unless you are speaking, because then we can see everything you're doing the whole time. So that might just be a better option, or unless you're getting ready to speak. Also, for presenters, we don't have you on the screen and we will be muting you. Or our friends in the internet will be muting you, but you can, and we do encourage lots of questions and chat, and we'll be checking on those throughout the program. If we can't get to your question this morning, we will be sending out a Q&A, and we are going to try to record this program for those of us who couldn't be here today. So without further ado, I want to introduce our hosts, starting with First Lady of Louisiana, Donna Edwards.
Okay, apparently I was muted, so I'm gonna start again. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second virtual Global Human Trafficking Prevention and Awareness Summit. And welcome to all of our attendees who were here in September, and we are thrilled to have lots of new attendees today. Almost 300 are on with us today. And I'd like to recognize some of our first spouses that are joining us today. We have First Lady Dunleavy of Alaska, First Lady Hutchinson's of Arkansas, First Lady Holcomb from Indiana, First Lady Bashir of Kentucky, First Lady Hogan of Maryland, First Lady Baker of Massachusetts, First Lady Reeves of Mississippi, First Lady Shore of Nebraska, First Lady McMaster of South Carolina, First Lady Lee of Tennessee, and of course, First Lady Cecilia Abbott of Texas. And many other representatives. 24 states are joining us today from Rome, Marcella Sanchez Sorando, and other representatives from Rome. We have representatives from Hawaii and many other CASA and CAC volunteers on with us today. My name is Donna Edwards. My husband is Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana, and I have the honor of serving as First Lady of our great state. You know, ending human trafficking is something that John Bel and I are very passionate about, and I am so proud of his continued leadership in working towards putting an end to trafficking, helping to restore the lives of the survivors and punishing the perpetrators. The more awareness that we have about this tragedy, and the more we learn from the experts about how to stop it, we can then all work together to eradicate this crime and help make life better for everyone. This summit is important in so many ways, and having partners to share information and best practices is critical. You know, there are many people to thank for making today happen. I want to start today by recognizing Texas First Lady Cecilia Abbott, who has partnered with Louisiana in this fight against human trafficking. Trafficking knows no boundaries, and people of all races, political parties, states, genders, ages, faiths, socioeconomic backgrounds are impacted. And that's why sharing information and working together strengthens the fight within our own states and across our country. So I'm very grateful for our co-sponsor, the Texas Center for Children and Family Studies. Your generous support has helped to make this event possible today. So thank you, thank you. Many thanks to all of the first spouses who are with us this morning. We have, I think now we're up to 12 spouses with us. I know that some are going to be coming on and some going off and coming in whenever they can. So I just appreciate them coming on and listening and learning about human trafficking. It's an honor to have each of you with us today. And lastly, but certainly not least, and thank you to our U.S. Department of Justice officials and other national and state leaders who are with us today. Your leadership is what guides us on this issue. We all have extremely busy schedules, a lot of Zooming going on, but the fact that you are here to learn more about what you can do individually within your organization, within your state, and what we can do collectively to end human trafficking speaks to how committed you all are to ending this terrible crime. Our first summit was held in September, was such a success in raising awareness and highlighting best practices that we knew we had to keep the momentum going. We heard heartfelt remarks from several first spouses, including Miss Hogan of Maryland, First Lady Kemp of Georgia, and of course, Cecilia Abbott of Texas, about how they use their platforms as first spouses to address human trafficking in their own states. First Lady Abbott, her staff, and officials working on human trafficking in Texas have assembled an incredible lineup today. And when you hear from these speakers, you will understand Texas's strong commitment to ending this crime and assisting survivors. I'm excited to tell you that during this summit, you will also hear from Deputy Bill Wolf from the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you again for being with us today. And we will also hear compelling testimony from a survivor, along with panel presentations from some of Texas experts and leaders in the field. The global pandemic has put many of our citizens in quarantine and isolation, and we know more children and youth may have had and continue to have increased exposure to sexual predators, predators in their own home and many online. Fortunately, we all have the opportunity to use our voices to speak for those who cannot. And this is exactly why we are here today. I know everyone is ready to get started, so I want to thank you again, and please join me in welcoming our first committed partner, Cecilia Abbott, and here we go. So a little bit about Cecilia Abbott, First Lady. In January of 2015, Cecilia Abbott made history by becoming the first Hispanic First Lady of Texas. She has been a teacher, vice principal, and principal at several Catholic schools across Texas, and has also worked in senior health care services. But Cecilia hasn't only devoted her professional life to helping others, she has done the same in her personal life. She serves on the board of several educational organizations and is a member of many philanthropic groups. Her signature initiative as First Lady combines the two things that she is most passionate about: Texas and philanthropy. She promotes volunteerism and service to others across Texas. Cecilia has also partnered with the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services on a similar initiative, Network of Nurture, to raise awareness about the ways Texans can support the children and families in the state's child welfare system. Cecilia collaborated with the governor's child sex trafficking team, the Department of Family and Protective Services, and a diverse group of faith leaders across Texas to work together to develop effective strategies to end human trafficking, the GRACE, Governor's Response Against Child Exploitation Initiative. Love that. Cecilia is a devoted wife to her husband of 39 years, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and a proud mother to her daughter Audrey, and dogs, Pancake and Peaches. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome First Lady Cecilia Abbott. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Donna, and thank you for all of you for joining us here today. Because our mission today is so important, I hope you will forgive me for reading from my notes. As a former teacher, as Donna mentioned, I always like to have a lesson plan in front of me. So I promise, but there will not be a quiz at the end of this. But anyway, it's so good to be meeting again as we begin this new year of hope and of promise. I'm delighted to see many of our Texas partners and many of my friends from all across the country here today. And I'm pleased to announce that today, First Lady Edwards and I are launching a partnership to bring hope to our country. We know that by working together with all of you, we can help to end human trafficking and exploitation. We will be co-hosting a series of online summits like this one, highlighting promising practices that can be replicated across the nation to end human trafficking and to support healing and thriving of its survivors. Thank you, First Lady Edwards, for the invitation to partner. We are truly honored to be in this fight with you. Now, more than ever, it is important that we embrace our communities and lift up those who are suffering, including those who are more vulnerable to exploitation because of the pandemic and its effect on all aspects of our lives. As we all know, human trafficking affects all of our communities, urban, suburban, and rural, in Texas and Louisiana and all 50 states. Traffickers attempt to destroy the individuality of their victims and strip away their dignity. They do this by force, fraud, coercion, manipulation, and by distancing themselves from the crime. They make their victims believe they are complicit in their own abuse. Sadly, even during the pandemic, trafficking has not slowed down. We have heard reports of landlords requesting sexual favors when tenants cannot afford rent because they have lost their jobs. And to our great sadness, we are seeing children being sold by their own families on screens or in person in exchange for money and or drugs. But there is hope. More and more, we are recognizing exploitation for what it is. We are not blaming the victims. We are helping survivors to recover, supporting their healing, and bringing exploiters to justice. I am so proud of the commitment of leaders all across this nation to fight human trafficking. The fact that you are here today with everything else you have to do is a testament to your commitment. I'm especially proud of our survivor leaders who selflessly share their stories. Sophia Strother is here today with us. I know you will be inspired by her amazing strength, resiliency, and the spirit that all of our survivor leaders share with us. I'd like to take a moment to highlight an incredible example of survivor leadership that just opened at our Texas State History Museum, or what we call in Texas, the Bullock Museum. Survivor leaders from Texas and beyond shared their stories of sex and labor trafficking to create the first ever human trafficking prevention museum exhibit in the country. This exhibit, entitled Not Alone, is age appropriate for middle school age children and up. It informs visitors of the realities of human trafficking, as well as how to recognize signs of potential exploitation. It teaches visitors about the difference between healthy and exploitative relationships and how to keep themselves safer on social media. It also inspires every visitor to help to get involved in some way to end human trafficking. It is really, truly a must-see. But if you can't make it to Austin, Texas before May 31st, this exhibit will be traveling across the state and hopefully across the country, visiting local libraries, community centers, and colleges. This is just one resource that we can share with you from Texas. In fact, the purpose of today's summit is to give you all a very brief overview of the resources that we can share with you. Texas is a national leader and a trailblazer in the fight against human trafficking, but we have also learned so much from others around the country. We have taken what works and adapted it to make it our own. We are proud to be sharing with you the Texas model to address child sexual exploitation and trafficking. Working with a child sex trafficking team in the governor's office and partners around the state, we are building a collaborative and comprehensive response to this urgent problem. We are doing the critical work of recognizing and recovering victims, walking alongside them to support healing from complex trauma, holding abusers accountable, and bringing justice for survivors, and moving upstream to protect children and to prevent exploitation. I would like to thank each of you for learning more about what we are doing here in Texas and about what more we can do together to end human trafficking. I have no doubt that by joining together, we can help end this inhumanity, because nothing on this earth is more powerful than Texans helping Texans and Americans helping Americans. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you will be able to join us again as we meet virtually in April, July, and October. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank, thank you, Mrs. Abbott. And now we'll hear from Bishop Vasquez.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for those beautiful words of inspiration. First Lady Cecilia Abbott, thank you. Let me express my gratitude to you and the governor for the Grace Initiative to address the scourge of human trafficking. As a faith leader, I am privileged to work with other religious leaders in bringing awareness to our people about this terrible evil that inflicts our world, our country, and our communities, and to advocate for victims to find healing and justice. So please join me now in prayer. Ever just and merciful God, creator of all and source of every good gift, we seek your divine protection for all who are exploited and enslaved. Grant release to those found forced into labor, bound in sexual slavery, or otherwise denied human freedom. In your boundless generosity, we beseech you, O Lord, guide us in our efforts to develop and promote strategies which protect children, to create loving and hospitable communities, to protect the vulnerable and secure the release of those who are bound. Our hearts break for those whose dignity and freedom have been stolen through force, coercion, or deception. Give us the courage to ensure adequate, safe housing, quality education, necessary health care, and nutritious sustenance to the poorest of our communities. Help us to lead others to recognize those who in plain sight are vulnerable and those who are trafficked. Grant that our communities flourish through the protection of the common good, which each citizen is protector of neighbor and the stranger alike. May our time together today bear much fruit in ending the scourge of human trafficking. By your strength, we will persevere, and may all glory be to you. Amen.
Amen. Now we want to turn it over to a special guest for a national perspective. We have Bill Wolf, who is Deputy Director of Office of Victims of Crime in the Department of Justice.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is certainly a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction, but also for all your incredible work. I've had the pleasure of knowing Andrea for several years now, and be able to witness in various different capacities the incredible work that she is doing in Texas. First Lady Edwards, I want to thank you for your continued leadership as well. First Lady Abbott, for all that you all do in this space. It really does take everyone coming together and certainly recognizing how important this issue is and how much impact you all can have by using your positions to elevate and raise awareness about this issue of human trafficking. I've been in the human trafficking field for quite a long time. First got involved as a police officer, as a detective, over a decade ago. It was something that was very strange to me. I had never been trained on human trafficking, didn't know what human trafficking was, or even how to deal with it. Was kind of thrown into my first case in dealing with some gangs, in particular MS-13. But that really changed the trajectory of my personal and professional life, to really take on this issue and to cause real change. I think we've done an incredible job, and as the bishop mentioned in his beautiful prayer, that we really need to make sure that we're providing the housing and the services and the care for victims of human trafficking. And that's absolutely essential. In fact, the Department of Justice, the office for which I worked for last year, awarded more than $100 million to impact this. And the majority of that money really focused on victim services. Last year in 2020, we recognized the 20th anniversary of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which was the first piece of comprehensive legislation here in the United States that recognized human trafficking and really started to direct resources in that direction. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act was built on 3 pillars: that of protection, prosecution, and prevention. I would say that over the past 20 years, we've really done a good job at addressing and looking at the protection for victims and the prosecution of the offenders. But one of the areas that really remains untouched in a meaningful way is prevention. Sort of that last pillar that really, I think we're in that phase now where we can really focus on the prevention piece. And I'm so thankful that this is, the topic of conversation today, because in this time, in our fight against human trafficking, prevention is key. And I would say even more so, given the global pandemic that we are experiencing now. We know that many of the lockdowns across our country and across the world today are leaving young people more and more vulnerable. We receive reports from our law enforcement partners and advocates in the field that are working in this space day in and day out, that the biggest concern right now is that youth don't have access to prevention curriculum. They don't have access to services that they would normally have if they were in the classroom. And so really, this is a call. This is a call for us to really look at how we're addressing this issue of human trafficking. One of the programs that the Department of Justice launched last year was funding for a development of prevention curriculum to be deployed in the schools in partnership with law enforcement across this country. That's really where we need to be focusing on innovative techniques to deliver that prevention curriculum to our youth, particularly in this time when our world has become so virtualized. It was mentioned earlier that, we Zoom from meeting to meeting, but oftentimes we forget that our children are still at risk. I'm a father of 6 children, and I can tell you that as I sit here talking to you all today, they're in the other room just down the hallway doing their schoolwork on the internet. I know where they are, and oftentimes that gives us this false sense of security, knowing that they're in my home. I'm able to provide that protection. But with the advent of technology and the ability of traffickers and exploiters to access our children through the internet, we have to understand that the threat is very real, even when our children are in our own homes. So I just want to congratulate all the incredible work that's being done in this space, particularly in the state of Texas. I've had the pleasure, as I mentioned, to really kind of observe all the work that they're doing, and a sincere congratulations to them. But also that this is a call and an understanding that there is still much work to be done. And we at the Department of Justice stand ready to support you all in the fight against human trafficking as you look to safeguard your communities. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out, share your successes, but also your needs with us so that we in DC can be more prepared to respond to you and support your efforts. Thank you for all that you're doing. And on behalf of the Department of Justice, we stand ready to support you and partner with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We really appreciate that, and really appreciate the partnership. And I'm just thrilled that you're going to be able to hear about some of the things that we're doing with regards to prevention in the state of Texas coming up. I'm Andrea Sparks again, y'all. I'm the director of Governor Abbott's Child Sex Trafficking Team. And today is really about us sharing the highlights of our model to address the commercial sexual exploitation of youth. We've been around since almost 5 years, since 2016. when Governor Abbott appointed me. And since then, we've learned a lot of things. And one of the most important things we've learned is that you have to keep learning, because this is a field which is constantly changing. As Bill said, even with COVID, we're seeing a whole new set of challenges, right? And the way that children and youth are being exploited is changing for sure. I'm going to try to make up some time here. I had some slides to share with you, but I really want to get to our distinguished presenters today, who are going to show you the highlights of our model and what we're trying to do in the state of Texas. So just real quick, we are the state of Texas, so we have to have a Lone Star, right? And around that star, we have 5 main goals that we're looking at to addressing child sexual exploitation. So, everything we do is children and youth centered. That's why we have children and youth right in the middle. And we're learning, as I said, every day, and learning now that we have so many adults who are survivors of child and youth trafficking, who don't even realize that they've been victimized until way later in life. So we also are providing services for adults as well, and supports for adults. We couldn't highlight everything today. We would have been here 2 days, but we tried to cram in the highlights of our model. So real quickly, our goal is to protect children and youth by building awareness of and resilience to child exploitation, and by curbing demand for sex trafficking. If we didn't have people willing to buy people for sexual abuse, we wouldn't have a problem. So that is part of our prevention strategy as well. And you're going to hear about both our prevention education efforts, our efforts to build programs that increase protective factors for those kids that we know are vulnerable, as well as our efforts to curb demand in the state of Texas. We also want to recognize our victims and survivors. We know that there are so many out there who don't even recognize themselves as survivors. And so we are raising awareness. We are doing it in a very respectful way, and not sensationalized media or images. There's a lot of misinformation out there right now, so we're constantly battling that. And then we're providing targeted training and outreach to recognize victims where we tend to find a lot of victims: homeless youth, kids coming out of the foster care system, the juvenile justice system, kids who are alone at home. And then we want to implement proactive screening tools across the state, and we're making great strides in doing that. We're going to talk about the tool that we are implementing in the state of Texas and how it is helping us see what child sex trafficking and youth trafficking looks like in the state. And then we want to support data collection and research. We want to recover youth who are exploited with protective and empowering responses rather than punitive approaches. And so we're going to talk about our 2 of our strongest strategies to do that, which are employing what we call CSATE advocacy, or CSATE advocates, commercially sexually exploited youth advocates. It's a special kind of advocate case manager that helps youth navigate all of our systems, whichever system they're in, or even if they're not in the system, helps them find healing in the long term, and also responds to crisis and helps them kind of regulate their own trauma. And then also our care coordination teams, which we're building throughout the state through our children's advocacy centers. So you're going to hear about both of those strategies. And then we want to support healing, of course, in the long term. This is probably one of the hardest things to do, right? And we struggle with it, and we continue to learn. But you're going to hear about one trauma-informed care approach and model that we have seen success with, and that we're continuing to expand in the state of Texas for youth as well as adults. And you're also going to hear about one of our long-term placements that we fund. They actually are an emergency shelter plus a long-term placement that has found the secret sauce to help these kiddos and youth not only survive, but thrive. And then lastly, of course, we want to bring justice. So that means justice for survivors against traffickers, exploiters, facilitators, people who profit off of this. And so we're going to be showing you a new tool and training that we brought to Texas. And actually, it's being deployed all over the United States right now, including in Tampa, getting ready for the Super Bowl. So you're going to get a glimpse of that, as well as hear from one of our survivor leaders in our state on what justice means for survivors. And you're going to find that it's not only prosecuting their exploiter, it's so much more. So I'm just so proud of this lineup today. I'm not going to go through these slides. You're going to get the slides that I originally planned on showing you, and you're going to get a recording of this, and you can find all of this on our website. But I really want to get to our first presenters because I think it's really important to stay on track, and they have so many more important things to say than I do. And so for Protect, our strategies, as I said, is really prevention education, building resiliency in those youth we know who are at risk, and also curbing demand. And so I want to introduce Todd Latiolis, who is our prevention and policy administrator on our team, and he's going to talk to you about those prevention strategies. And then right afterwards, Jamie Carruthers at Children at Risk, who will talk about our strategies to curb demand.
Thanks, Andrea. It's so great to be here with everybody. My name is Todd Latiolis, as Andrea mentioned, and my contact information is there if you want to follow up with me with my favorite coworker, my son Theo, who's been joining me in all Zoom meetings since he arrived in September. So it was only fitting that he's there on the slide. So I just want to talk to you all a little bit about what we mean by prevention and protecting youth from exploitation in Texas. So on this first slide, you're going to see a representation of legislation in Texas pertaining to training and awareness around trafficking. We really believe that prevention begins with awareness. And so for the past really about 12 years, our legislature has passed more and more comprehensive laws pertaining to legislation. If you could go to that next slide, Andrea. And so a lot of those laws have focused on areas where certain professionals are in a unique position to identify trafficking. So you see, obviously, law enforcement. For over 10 years, we've had mandatory training for our law enforcement officers, but also commercial drivers, license holders, cosmetologists, educators, child welfare workers, and judges. And these laws have also focused on posting of signage that educates the community about indicators of trafficking and also directs potential survivors on where they could go to access help, how they can contact the hotline to receive support. And so this is an important first step, is really building that community awareness. But to us, prevention goes a step beyond awareness. And so on these next couple of slides, I just want to share with you a quick sort of metaphor, a story. A lot of you may have heard this river story before. It's very common in the public health world, and also for folks doing work on prevention specifically. And the story goes something like this. You know, I was standing down by the river one day with my friend Andrea Sparks fishing. She's from Louisiana, so she was looking for crawfish, but I was fishing, and all of a sudden, coming down the river, we see a little girl flashing and flailing coming down the river, and I just immediately jump in, pull her to safety on the shore. We give her CPR, call an ambulance, and get her off to safety. And wow, adrenaline pumping, can't believe what a close call that was. And we get back to fishing, and all of a sudden, a little boy comes floating down the river. Same scenario, jump in, freezing cold, pull him out, get him to safety. And lo and behold, a third kid comes down the river, and I turn around and Andrea is heading in the opposite direction. I ask her where she's going, and she says, I'm heading upstream. I'm going to find out how these kids are ending up in the river. And that really is the work of prevention, is moving upstream to stop this thing before it happens. So on the next slide, you'll see how the public health world kind of identifies 3 types of prevention. And a lot of our work around the country has really been focused on secondary and tertiary prevention. That means something bad already happened. We're responding to the violence that already occurred. So a kid has been trafficked, and we're trying to identify them and recover them and get them to safety, which is critical. It's important, and we are preventing future bad things from happening to them. But that's like me jumping in the river and helping a kid get to shore that's already fallen in. It's not until we move upstream that we're truly engaged in primary prevention. That's trying to stop this violence before it happens. And you can imagine a number of scenarios that might lead to that kid being in the river to begin with. You know, maybe there's a bad actor upstream that's pushing kids off of the bridge. Maybe that kid lives in a community where the bridge is just not that strong. You know, maybe we need to do some work on that bridge, or maybe we need some adults to be walking, chaperoning with those kids across the river. And each of these ideas relates to work we could be doing in the prevention space. And I want to highlight just a couple. So on the next slide, this has really been one of the heaviest lifts, frankly, but one of the most important things we're doing in our state is focusing on schools and looking at what a school-based approach to prevention really looks like. And so in our model, you can see there represented, it's very much from the top, administrative level, looking at who oversees the district, all the way down to the student level. And our laws in Texas actually reflect this as well. So we had legislation last session that says that all school board members, all superintendents must receive training on child abuse and trafficking. And our response in Texas, because trafficking has been a form of child abuse since 2011, our school response to trafficking is closely intertwined with our response to abuse. And so at that administrative level, you're going to see creation of policy to respond to abuse and trafficking. And that policy has to include training for educators. And so all educators in Texas, as in many states, are required to be trained on child abuse. And we have made it extra clear in both legislation and administrative role that also includes trafficking and youth that are at high risk for trafficking. And then finally, at that bottom layer, you can see that we also want to reach parents and students. You know, schools can do a lot, but we really have to educate parents about this problem. If people don't even believe that kids are falling into the river, we're never going to address this problem. So they have to be aware that this is an issue, and they also have to know what steps they can take to protect their children. And lastly, educating the youth themselves. You know, it is so important to reach youth with age-appropriate education that's also research-based. And what research shows works is going even beyond awareness. We can't just say, this is a bad thing that happens to some people. We have to actually provide them with the knowledge and the skills necessary to stay safe and to recognize this in their peers as well. So that approach is really kind of universal, reaching every kid, knowing they're all potentially at risk. But we also recognize that some kids have heightened vulnerabilities, additional risk factors that Andrea mentioned earlier, like kids with prior sexual abuse, kids that are homeless or have run away. And we want to reach those kids with additional education and try to build as many protective factors as we can. And so beyond just education, what research tells us is maybe the most powerful protective factor in the life of a child is access to a safe, trusted adult and knowledge about healthy relationships. So we really want to leverage those programs that already create access points to safe, trusted adults in their lives. So our faith-based communities that walk alongside youth, our Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, and mentorship programs, all of those COSIP programs, of course, all of those programs are doing the work of trafficking prevention, even though that's not necessarily their mission and vision of their organization. So if we can just tweak their perspective with a little education, we can go a long way to protecting youth. And finally, on the next slide, it was already mentioned to you all before, but I did want to take a moment to acknowledge the exhibit at the Bullock, Not Alone. We're so proud of this exhibit. You can see a couple pictures of it there. As Andrea and the First Lady mentioned, there are so many amazing survivors and groups like Love 146 and the McCain Institute and Three Strands Global that helped to put this exhibit together, and it's very powerful. And I also want to acknowledge a couple of those advisory members that have helped us a lot in Texas in terms of prevention education broadly. I mentioned Three Strands Global and Protect. They actually took that curriculum and they created training for all of our schools, administrators, online training for educators, and curriculum for youth. And they tweaked that to be available in an online environment as well. As Bill mentioned, it's so important in this current era that we're adapting to where the youth are. And also Unbound here in Texas has helped us reach thousands of educators with their training. So with all of that, I know it's so quick to talk about prevention, but it's so important, the work that we're doing. Our last strategy really is focusing on those potential exploiters. We know that there are bad actors that are pushing kids into this river, and part of that problem is the issue of demand, the fact that there are buyers that are driving this market. And so I want to pass it over to my good friend, Jamie Carruthers, to talk to you a little bit more about our strategies around disrupting demand in the state of Texas.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's an honor to be here this morning, and we so appreciate Governor Abbott's commitment to ending demand and all the support from the child sex trafficking team on this important issue. I'm Jamie Carruthers. I'm Senior Staff Attorney at Children at Risk, and I head up the CEASE network, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what that looks like and what we're doing to curb demand in Texas. Next slide, please. So CEASE Texas, CEASE is another acronym to remember, but that's Cities Empowered Against Sexual Exploitation. It's a network of cities that's expanding all of the time, supported by the Office of the Texas Governor. And we're employing strategies aimed at, we're trying to stop current buyers. We're really trying to deter future buyers from falling into this lifestyle, and also educating the public about the inherent harms of illegal commercial sex. And we're working in Houston, Austin, North Texas. I've grouped those two together. I don't want to offend anybody from Dallas or Fort Worth, but in our work, it's very hard to tease those two cities out because they are sister cities. San Antonio, Corpus Christi is our latest expansion city. And this spring, we'll be moving, early this spring, we'll be going into San Angelo for folks not in Texas. That's around the Permian Basin, where a lot of oil and fracking is. And then El Paso, which will be getting us closer to the border and a new area for us as well. And what we've tried to do with CEASE Texas and what we are doing is, the first thing we had to do was determine where these buyers are and what are they using. Probably everyone on this call knows what Backpage was. When Backpage was seized, that was a moment for celebration, and it's everyone who worked on that should celebrate. But in Houston, for example, Backpage had over 500 unique, meaning they were only posted one, ads a day on Backpage in its heyday. And all those ads are paid for. This is, and so no one's buying ads for which there's not a receptive consumer market. And so when Backpage was seized, these thousands upon thousands of buyers across Texas didn't all say, well, I'm gonna take up golf or go to church. No, they started looking elsewhere on the internet to facilitate their purchase of illegal commercial sex and their purchase of human trafficking victims. So we had to identify what platforms were being used, because that is the sort of the backbone of CEASE Texas, is working online. And then we wanted to gather data in each region, because that allows us to go into places like San Antonio and say, hey, we've been running a chat bot, which is an interactive bot. We're running decoy ads on these sites. We've been scraping all of these ads down. And here's what it looks like. You've had 50,000 ads in the last 6 months, and we've had X number of responses. And so it helps us communicate with law enforcement and prosecutors, stakeholders, and recruits. And I talked a little bit about the chat bot, but we're also doing cyber patrols, and that's getting just everyday guys together to work to deter buyers and end sex trafficking. It has been the most rewarding work of my entire career, I have to say. And of course, we're trying to increase buyer arrests, and hand in hand with that, we have to increase buyer prosecutions as well and make sure that work is capitalized on. Next slide, please. And really briefly, this is a very simple illustration, but any market, legitimate or illegitimate, can generally be broken down into three main components. And the first component is supply. At Amazon or something, that might be widgets, or a good or a service. And in sex trafficking, the sex trafficking marketplace, the supply is, of course, people, right? It's men, women, and children who are bought and sold for a profit again and again and again. Every market has to have a method of getting that supply out into the marketplace so people can buy it. And of course, here we're talking about pimps and traffickers. And of course, every market has to have a consumer base or it wouldn't exist at all. You have to have someone who's purchasing that. No one supplies or a good or service for which there is no market or no consumer base. And here it's men. It's men who are willing to put their needs ahead of the exploitation of another. And when we look at this marketplace and we decide, we look at how we're going to attack this, how we're going to end this. You know, we've attacked historically, and we're not much different from any state in this respect. Historically, Texas has attacked the supply. You know, we've arrested prostituted individuals. We've previously, prior to say 2009, generally, we looked at prostitutes as victims. And that was our main attack point, was the supply, which we can look around and say today, oh, okay, that didn't work. Should we be attacking the distribution? Of course we should. Pimps and traffickers need to be brought to justice. However, these cases take a long time to make. This is a low risk criminal enterprise, right? If you're going to be a criminal and you're a sociopath, this would be the path of least risk. So we should be arresting them, but the cases take a long time. They hinge on victim testimony. I do not believe in any form or fashion we can end human trafficking by arresting all the pimps. So we look at that last component. Well, here we've got a lot more leverage. These buyers have something to lose. They're catchable, they're culpable, they're deterrable, and they're fueling this market. Take away the money and no one's going to be offering the supply of victims. Next slide, please. And so why are buyers buying? Well, these are 5 reasons identified by research done by Demand Abolition. And some buyers are seeking intimacy. And below each category, you see a chatbot response or a cyber patrol response from buyers we've interacted with. Our patrol teams across Texas have interacted with. Seeking intimacy, you know, just hold the phone. I'm looking for a back massage. I'm so lonely. And really, that's one of the biggest categories we have of guys, the lonely guy. Sex without intimacy, he's just looking to hook up. Seeking variety, this guy's seeking a very specific type of woman. Thrill seeking, he wants to hide from the wife and meet this person in a car. And then we have pathology. That's the other big bucket. We see the other ones, of course, but the 2 biggest are the lonely guy and the pathological guy. He has no remorse. He thinks women are objects. He has no qualms whatsoever with what he is doing. And they are the hardest ones for us to reach. And that is really, when someone is in the pathology stage, that becomes really more of a law enforcement issue. Next slide, please. And so why focus on demand? You know, when we first started our anti-demand journey, we really wanted to know how we were doing in Texas with prostitution arrests. We were arresting a buyer for every seller, or 2 buyers for every seller, or 2 sellers for every buyer. Well, the truth is, historically, we've arrested about 1 buyer for a little over 10 sellers. So a lot of work to do here. Some jurisdictions, such as Houston, there's some other places around the state, other jurisdictions that tend to arrest buyers in higher numbers, sometimes parity or above in buyer-seller arrests. We have a lot of work to do here, and it shows why the community outreach and deterrence efforts driven through Seize Texas are extremely important. Next slide. And so what does an anti-demand strategy look like? What have we tried to build? Well, first off, it has to be data-driven. We need the data, and we've built our own data tools in order to be able to go, I talked about this earlier, to be able to go into a region, and a new region, and say to faith-based leaders, other NGOs, faith-based groups, city leaders, prosecutors, law enforcement, and say, look, we have an idea of what it looks like in your area, and can we share this data with you? And they're always glad to get that kind of data. And we're very transparent with our data sharing throughout all Seize Texas programming. But that really gives us that foothold. And it has to be sustained. We have to have partnerships. I know a couple of our Seize partners are here today on this call. I saw Menta Moore from Corpus Christi. We have a network of partners around the state because we can't do it without them. We need them. They give us space. They help us with recruiting. They help us with promotion. They help us with so much. And of course, Seize Texas would be nothing without the citizen buy-in, without the everyday guys who are working with us on cyber patrols. We've got to have some policy change. And we hope our data can help inform the legislature and other policymakers from the local to state level. Hope they look at that data and say, well, we should do something. They should be supported by law enforcement. We need that law enforcement and prosecutorial buy-in. And then it has to be survivor informed. We need that ethical lens of a survivor to make sure that what we are doing is equitable. Next slide. And so I know most people are probably also familiar with Spotlight. We've kind of built our own. It's not as sophisticated, but it allows us access and to ads. And we were able to customize it to use the websites that we know are most prevalent across the state of Texas. This allows us to track ad volume, searchable. We can do a lot of statistical things with this. And of course, it allows us to go in and talk in these regions and show the level of engagement or the level of demand. And you can see these are the ads from 2020 per month. In Houston, we 100,000 ads per month. North Texas, the combined cities, of course, had more, about 100, I don't know, 35, followed by San Antonio, followed by Austin. And these order switches up a little bit when we start adjusting per capita, with North Texas still being the front runner, but then followed by Austin, our lowest number of ads per month, then Houston, and then San Antonio. Next slide. And we operate a chatbot. It has AI, or we're building it out, so it now has more AI capacity. And what we're doing here is we're trying to do we're trying to do straight up deterrence. Sometimes we deter with the chatbot, sometimes we're data gathering, but we post decoy ads using ethically sourced photos, and we're getting better and better and better at creating these ads, and our dashboard really helps with that. But what we're trying to do is gather information. We're trying to also deter by sending the deterrent message. Next slide, please. But when buyers text in, the automated chatbot texts back. And here we're really trying to get some data from this guy. He's from Beaumont. We have one from League City. We have one from Louisiana, but he works in Texas and he wishes he could find a good woman, LOL. But you can kind of see these are the unsophisticated buyers. These aren't the ones on that far end that I was showing you, the pathological buyers who have been doing this for a long time and are very savvy. And these are the guys we know we can reach. This is our market for our CEAS activities. We're trying to keep these guys from falling into that pathological or high frequency buyer bucket. And you can see we can get a lot of data from them. We can find out what they're looking for. We can find out where they are. We can find out their names. You know, these aren't the savviest guys. Next slide, please. And of course, we follow all that up with a deterrent message and offer them resources through the chatbot. And the chatbot also allows us to do things like gauge the level of potential buying activity. It actually helps us gauge the number of potential buyers in a region. But cyber patrols are the most exciting part of CEAS Texas. We love the coalition building. We like doing the online deterrence work and the number crunching, but this by far is the most rewarding. We work with a group called EPIC, the EPIC Project out of Portland. EPIC pioneered this approach of posting decoy ads. Well, first, we start at the very beginning. We recruit men. They get background check men who want to be involved in this work. I don't think it's a secret that there's a lot more opportunity for women who want to volunteer to get involved in human trafficking, and less so for men. And there are a lot of men who want to get involved in human trafficking, anti-human trafficking. And CEAS Texas Cyber Patrols, there's the outlet. And it's, you know, it's geared, the work is kind of geared towards men. It's very action oriented. It's a little confrontational. You're working with other men who need help. And so it's a perfect match. And what we're doing is we get them trained, they do a background check, they're given a Chromebook, and that Chromebook is loaded with a software package provided by EPIC. Once the training is over and we're meeting for patrols, which we do at least once a month in each region, but sometimes as often as 3 or 4 times a month, they get together in a room or virtually, depending on their preference, given the pandemic. We post the ads online. As buyers begin to text and call into these ads, they're answered by our patrollers. And so what we're trying to do is disrupt the market. We're trying to support law enforcement efforts, and we want to change the culture. And how are cyber patrols changing the culture? Well, there's a micro change with cyber patrols, not only with the buyers who are receptive to the message, or at least who've done this is their first time and now they're really scared because someone's watching, but it's also the micro changes within our team that can turn into macro changes in an area. The men who do this work, the change is profound. They become extremely passionate. this work changes them and they become deeply engaged in their communities. It's not enough to patrol. They want to patrol more, and then they want to get out in their communities and they want to spread this message. It's difficult to overstate the change that I have seen in some of these men as far as their willingness to confront this issue and their passion in bringing this awareness to others. Next slide, please. And these are our disruptions. Fort Worth is the oldest team, the longest running team. And so they do the most patrols and have the most guys. You can see over 400 there, but big shout out to our brand new fledgling Corpus Christi team. And also our stalwart Georgetown team, which is about to have 2 teams in Georgetown. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. The reason those numbers seem low is because a lot of those patrollers, we do statewide virtual patrols. So anybody from any team can join those. Next slide, please. And here's an example of a conversation from Cyber Patrol. This is a Texas patroller actually interacting with a Detroit buyer. Detroit patrolled right before us because people are doing this all around the nation. Those ads are still up. Buyers are still contacting those ads. Our guys will talk to a Detroit buyer. And when Detroit goes online, or Phoenix or Anchorage, and the Houston ads are still up, they'll be talking to Houston buyers as well as buyers in their own region. We get not constant coverage, but a lot of nationwide coverage thanks to Epic and this network. So are you available? Yes, sir. In Call or Out Call, then he starts talking about where he is. He wants to ask a few questions, and he starts, imparting some information. Why are you calling these ads? But he's doing it from a place of non-judgment. He's not saying, hey, scumbag, do you have a wife or a daughter? Would you like to, he is trying to establish a rapport. The goal isn't simply to scare. It's to affect a change. It's to inject cognitive dissonance in these buyers' minds. And to be honest, outside of this, they may be shining examples in their communities. They may volunteer at charities and support their church and be great parents and all these other things. But they're also purchasing human trafficking victims and prostituted individuals. And in making them reconcile what they're actually doing with the person they believe themselves to be is very effective. And you see our volunteer is dropping a lot of information there. Next slide, please. And so he says, I'm too old to be on these sites. I have daughters myself. I'm going to go pray now. He tells him his name is Calvin. He asks for resources because we connect with local groups in each region. We can offer that have counseling for buyers or any other kind of service. So we provide those to the buyers when they want them. Now, some buyers will curse at us and hang up. No doubt about that. But they know someone's out there watching. And the reason this is called setting the bat is we were more aggressive the first couple of years, much more aggressive with the scare tactics. We have now transitioned, and Epic has transitioned into a more counseling role where we're actually trying to get to the roots of these buyers' problems. And amazingly, and I was very skeptical about this, amazingly it has worked. And it has exponentially increased the value of our work. And you just have to ask one of our patrollers to know that that is true. Next slide, please. So patrolling during some of our growth and challenges. Patrolling during COVID has been difficult. Some of our groups do meet live, and as long as they are, because that's really the most effective way, and we need the accountability of other guys. And as long as they follow CDC guidelines, we're fine with that if they're comfortable. But retention is more difficult for guys who are presenting virtually. Patrolling virtually. Not all guys can patrol virtually. If you've got a wife and kids at home, you probably don't want to be talking to sex buyers unless you've got a basement or something. We don't have basements in Texas. And coalition building has also been slower in some ways. In other ways, it's been better because people are more available through Zoom. As I said, we're expanding into 2 new cities. We want to make sure every city that we expand to now has a sustainability plan in place before the team even gets started. And we want to build sustainability plans for existing teams to make sure this keeps going on. And of course, we need more law enforcement buy-in. In some jurisdictions, we've got great buy-in. In some jurisdictions, not as much. And what I mean by that, the minimum threshold, look, take our data, take all the buyer data that we have as we're interacting with these buyers. Website seizures are, again, a call for celebration. CityX Guide was the easiest site for us to use, and it was used across Texas, and it was seized by the DOJ. And anybody who wants more information on that and how much money these places make, I would suggest looking up CityX Guide and reading about that. But of course, it throws a giant monkey wrench in our work as we begin to try to get on these sites, but you become much more skilled at evading liability by putting up verification processes that are ostensibly to help trafficking, but are really to reduce their liability. Getting decoy ads, and then of course these aren't all challenges. We also want to link our data with already existing data sets, and we want to share our data. We really do. Next slide, please. And so that's it for me. I'm Jamie Carruthers. I want to just thank you all so much for being here and learning about SEAS Texas. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to talk about it. And thanks again.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Todd. We're going to move on to our next goal for in our model, and that is to recognize victims and survivors. And so we're going to hear from Debbie Solcher and John Namey about our tool that we're rolling out in the state of Texas to recognize young survivors, as well as a platform that we can use to better see what trafficking looks like in the state of Texas. And then we're going to hear from our DFPS, Department of Family and Protective Services Commissioner, Jamie Masters, about the GRACE initiative. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie and John. Debbie, are you there? Uh-oh. Let's see if I can find her.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Andrea. My name is Debbie Solcher, and I'm the Central Texas Regional Administrator for the Governor's Office Child Sex Trafficking Team. And I'm joined this morning by John Namey, President and CEO of Allies Against Slavery, and our partner in this endeavor. Next slide, please. Sexual exploitation of youth has gone unrecognized and unseen, and we know that you can't solve a problem that you can't see. So our team partnered with West Coast Children's Clinic out of California to bring their validated tool to Texas. West Coast is a large nonprofit providing counseling services, trauma work, foster youth development, and transition age support groups to youth. And they're especially trained in trauma, but they were realizing they were not able to recognize exploited youth in their care. The need to screen is clear and is reinforced by their validation findings that 75% of youth were being exploited for 2 years or longer before anyone ever realized that they were being exploited. 75% of those youth did not see themselves as even being exploited, and 50% of the youth were 14 years of age or younger when the exploitation started. So this is not an easy thing to recognize, amplifying the necessity to use a screening tool to assist in identification. The use of the screening tool will help us to identify exploited youth or those at high risk for exploitation, intervening earlier, providing better outcomes for youth. It will help us to better understand what's going on with the prevalence, the characteristics of those youth that are being exploited, as the tool is used in various agencies and across different systems. And it will also inform our strategy around this public health issue as we garner data to inform us of trends and the scope of the actual problem. Next slide, please. The SEED is a universal screening tool and was validated for youth 10 years old and older, and it can be used on anyone regardless of their gender, race, or any other aspect of their identity or behavior. This does not mean that the criteria is not applicable to younger youth, only that the tool was validated on this particular age group. Universal screening is a first step in identifying risk, and we use this in many settings, such as preventative screening for health problems. We all go to the dentist for regular checkups for preventative care. The goal is the same, to identify a potential problem earlier for intervention in order to reduce suffering. Next slide. The SEED is an information integration tool, not an interview tool. Information from all sources across multiple systems, agencies, and individuals is used to perform the screening. The tool organizes all the information that you have related to a youth to determine risk for sexual exploitation. It's designed to be used in various systems and settings, and our current partners include multiple juvenile probation departments, DFPS at a limited capacity, facilities and providers intersecting with youth at high risk for exploitation, such as shelters, Additionally, all of our CSA advocates are trained so that they may assist partners in screening youth who are referred directly or through care coordination, which you will hear more about later this morning. The information is organized into 8 key indicators of information. Each indicator has statements to consider. These are the 8 indicators here. You may not always have the information that you need to score a statement within these indicators, but if you have a concern about that particular statement, this would be a flag for you to find out more information for future rescreenings. Here's a sample of one of the key indicators. This indicator organizes all known information about housing and caregiving. Some of the statements to consider address information within the last 90 days and others over a lifetime. The information is scored individually across all 8 key indicators that were shown on the previous slide, and all 8 indicator areas are then tallied for a total score on the continuum. You'll see a sample screening a little later in this presentation so you can get a better idea of the tool. Through our partnership with Allies Against Slavery, the Lighthouse platform gathers our See It screening data, and we're able to visualize the data in various ways. This pie chart illustrates the breakdown of scoring across the See It continuum of no concern, possible concern, and clear concern. Since 2016, over 35,000 youth screenings have been performed by our partners in the state of Texas. Out of those screenings, we have recognized over 4,500 youth as clear concern for sexual exploitation. Clear concerns are reported to the abuse hotline as a suspected victim of child abuse and are eligible for all services that the governor's office funds, including care coordination and advocacy. While those possible concerns are not eligible for services, these are youth that are at high risk for sexual exploitation, indicating the need for community intervention and rescreening as more information is gathered. John Namey will be sharing some data points that were other data points that we're able to track as well through Lighthouse. Thank you very much. John?
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Andrea, and your team, as well as First Lady Edwards and First Lady Abbott. It's an honor to be with you all today and to participate in this great work that's happening across the state of Texas. Allies has operated in Central Texas for a decade. You can see our mission here. And ultimately, we're all about protecting freedom and dignity. About 5 years ago, we partnered with the University of Texas on a statewide study of human trafficking and found that on any given day, many more people than we ever imagined were being trafficked and exploited, and fewer than we ever hoped were being identified. And that began us on a journey of beginning to understand how we could use data and technology to identify victims and survivors and support their care. In 2018, we first launched an early version of Lighthouse. And Andrea, if you head to the next slide, I can talk a bit about that platform. It's an innovative software tool that helps providers identify victims, coordinate care, and understand trends in their data. Last year, we forged a partnership with the West Coast Clinic, who, as Debbie mentioned, is the creator of the See It screening instrument. And we're able to integrate that See It tool into Lighthouse. And if you look at the Lighthouse portfolio on the left side of the screen, there is a portal into Lighthouse that's used by direct service providers who are actively completing See It screenings and managing client data. And we also allow for individuals and organizations to securely share their data through that side of the platform. Most recently, with the governor's office, we've been expanding Lighthouse's capabilities on the right side of the screen to show that aggregate platform. And this is just a snapshot of now the data that we have in Lighthouse by the Numbers. We're really building a human trafficking data model for the state and trying to stitch together this story of all the great work that Andrea teed up at the beginning of the conference today. We have over 80 Lighthouse licensees. These are organizations like CASAs and CACs, Child Advocacy Centers, domestic violence shelters, homeless and runaway youth facilities that are logging into Lighthouse and completing their See It screenings. It represents over 675 active users across the state. And you can see the numbers there that Debbie already referenced of the total See It's and clear concern screenings coming in through the platform. We're also ingesting care coordination data and and census data from across the state, really to create a layered view and look at multiple sources in one place to really help stakeholders at all levels understand what trafficking looks like in Texas and how to best combat it. So I'm going to give a demo of the platform today. And as I begin, just to note that I'll start by logging in first to the portion of the platform that's used by direct service providers and individuals in the field to complete their See It screenings. I'm going to log into a demo account, so we're not going to reveal any live data. It's going to be dummy data. No personally identifiable information is revealed. And Lighthouse is hosted in the cloud, so it's a web-based application that can be securely accessed only by authorized users from any internet-connected device via their work email and a secure password. So as I log in, what you first see is what we call our person record dashboard. Essentially, it's a list of individuals and clients that have been entered into the system by individuals in the field managing this client data. You see a case ID number and any biographical information that might have been identified for this person. We also show the most recent or highest level conclusion of the See It screening at a glance. And a user can quickly search the database to see if they've already worked with an individual or add a new person to the system pretty quickly. I'm going to show you what a person record looks like here. This is, again, a dummy record for Jane Doe. This is not real data, but it shows you a view of the kinds of biographical information that can be collected. All of that is optional and really entered at the discretion of the individual organizations that are using Lighthouse. I'm not going to have time to cover every single feature in the platform today, but you can see some of the other components that are associated with the person record. Group sharing, which enables multidisciplinary teams or care coordination teams to securely share information that they're coordinating for a client. And then below that, you can see the category where you would enter your See It screenings. These are essentially the historical record of screenings that have been created for an individual you're working with, which actually allows you to see if those screenings change over time. We have an at a glance way to view the conclusion of those screenings. So no icon there means no concern. The yellow icon would indicate a clear concern on that screening, or excuse me, a possible concern on that screening. And then the red icon is a clear concern. Instead of taking the time to go through a whole screening today, I'll just click into one and show you a summary of that screening. The See It inside Lighthouse is exactly the same as the paper instrument that Debbie walked through earlier. We've just built that out electronically. It includes a pre-assessment that whoever is at the agency filling out the See It would complete, and then the questionnaire that contains the same 8 sections of the tool. If I were filling this out in real time, I would just be clicking these radio buttons and I would be selecting my observations, and Lighthouse would automatically score that section as well as the ultimate conclusion here on the summary page. We show you each of the scores for these categories, what you found around housing and caregiving, prior abuse and trauma, and then ultimately the clear concern score at the bottom there that fits us right in the middle of our continuum of clear concern. One of the important things to note is that we also list the SNO information summary, and this is really a tool for service providers to understand what did I not know or what did I not have access to when I was screening a youth that I might need to look more closely at next time. So here we have nearly 60% no information for environment and exposure on the See It, and that might be an area we particularly want to look at next time we work with Jane Doe. There's a post-See It assessment, as well as the ability to add location data and program data for that See It, which is helpful if you work in multiple jurisdictions or statewide. If I head back to the person record, I'll show you quickly some supplemental information that can be entered. Again, this is all optional, but it allows organizations to essentially build a profile for the client they're working with to really understand additional context and what this youth's experience might have been, whether or not CPS was called or law enforcement, and whether an advocate was engaged. So you can have all of that trafficking information at a glance. The exciting part of Lighthouse is that we serve all of this up in real time for organizations in the field to see their own data. So that data doesn't disappear, but we want people to be able to access it and learn from it quickly. So you can see overall demographics, but I'll focus in on the data dashboard just for See It screenings that organizations can view. You see how many screenings have been created, how many people in each category. Again, we're in a dummy site here, so you probably wouldn't see 78% of your screenings as clear concern. We're typically seeing closer to 13% of overall screenings as clear concern. You can filter based on time as well and see if that changes to get a different view of the data. and see how that evolves and adapts, and relate it to real world experiences that you might have. Andrea, I think you've paused the demo if you want to continue that at the bottom. Thank you. So if you can click screenings over time and you see how that works over the last 30 days, for instance, and see if those trends are related to any real world events that might be the reason behind why you've had increased screenings come in your door. And then what we like to do is really serve up the ability for people to sort and look at different cuts of their data based on, for instance, age at each concern level, or were there trends related to, for instance, ethnicity. And so we're really about helping people in the field learn and then be responsive across all of this criteria. Earlier, Todd mentioned these prevention strategies and understanding indicators or risk factors. And so we're serving this up in a way that really empowers the field to say, what are the red flags or the indicators that are most commonly associated with youth that we're screening who are clear concern? You see, again, an example of how that distribution might work for an individual organization, school history or juvenile justice history. This all informs service delivery and then helps those organizations actually move upstream to prevent exploitation. So, so far in the demo, I've really been showing how an individual organization would use Lighthouse to complete their See It. And I'm going to transition over to demonstrate just how we've been able to partner with the Office of the Governor to expand Lighthouse's capabilities as a statewide platform. So when you log in first to this portion for Lighthouse, you see the great state of Texas, and the application is organized essentially with our major navigation for features on the left-hand side, filters along the top so you can further sort the data, and different categories on the right-hand side to drill down further into each dashboard. So on the services map, you're looking not at every service available for victims and survivors of trafficking in Texas, but really those that are funded by the Office of the Governor and the Child Sex Trafficking team. You can interact with the map or click to actually drill into it and look more closely, or you can actually click on one of the cards on the right, those, again, categories of service defined by the Office of the Governor, and get more detail about that service area. So here we're looking at CSA advocacy, and we can see number of youth served by organizations in that category of services, total organizations. We also show each of the services at the county level. So if you work in a particular county and have an interest in really understanding what's the mix of services, for instance, we'll pull up Harris County here and click on Harris County. We serve that up in a card with more detail. Pulling in also here, you see the census data, number of youth under age 25, how many individuals have been screened in that county, how many clear concern screenings we had for that county, and some information about youth and care coordination and the organizations operating in that county. Again, we're really resourcing and empowering individuals with different views of the information to understand what's happening where they are. The regional view empowers the regional administrators like Debbie and the others across the state to really get a sense of what's happening in their area. We're clicking on North Texas here. That card populates to show the county list. Anytime in Lighthouse you see this icon that says add to reports, you can add that data point or that graphic to a report. And then the drop-down caret that says see more actually allows you to get a tabular view of data or drill in and look at what might comprise that data point. We're seeing here also the number of youth under 25, how many have been screened, and how many were clear concern. The final view that I'll show you on the map is the screenings map. And so this is going to take a minute to populate because it's actually pulling from the 35,000 plus See It screenings that we have for the state of Texas. If you look at the left-hand side, you're going to see that screening box change as I hover over each of the counties. And so this is showing us a distribution of screenings. To be clear, this is not where exploitation has occurred. This is where screening has occurred. But darker blue means denser or more screenings in that county. And no surprises, our major metro areas are where we see the greatest volume of screening. But we actually learn as much about what we don't see on this map, which is where screenings aren't happening. Oftentimes it may mean that there's only one or very few service providers in a county. It may also mean that in Texas, it's a rural county and we have more cows than we do people in that county. But this gives us a sense of where we might need to expand screenings as we continue to work towards that priority of identification and protecting youth. I'm going to move away from the map here to show you an additional view of the data as we click on demographics. So these demographic charts are informed again by the See It data, and this really helps us level up our narrative around who is being screened and any trends that we might be seeing there. So what you see here is a distribution of age based on all screenings. And we can change the filter at the top if we're interested just in seeing, does the age distribution change for youth who are screened as clear concern? And as the graph refreshes, you're going to notice it changed slightly to the right there, the distribution, an older population. We can add that to reports or see more. Here, the data shows us that the average age of youth who are screened as clear concern in Texas is just over 16 years old. So again, a helpful tool to really understand who is it we're screening, not just how many have occurred. I'm going to switch the filter back to all screenings and show you another view here in demographics. This one is of gender. You might wonder, wait a minute, that's interesting. We've got more males who have been screened in Texas than females. What's going on there? Well, that's actually because nearly 1/3 of our screenings come from the juvenile justice departments across Texas, where we see more males than females. And so as I change the filter to clear concern screenings, you see that graph refresh, and we might see a distribution that might be more common with what our expectation would be, more females who are screened as clear concern in the See It than males. We have a few other views here in demographics that allow you to see different cuts of the data and combinations, really geared towards empowering stakeholders like Andrea's team to really explore and understand what we're seeing. As I click into the indicators dashboard, all of these indicators are informed by the 8 sections of the See It tool that we went through earlier. And we're showing how often these indicators are showing up based on the concern level of the See It. So again, we see juvenile justice as a high indicator that's showing up around screenings that are clear concern because of the majority of our screenings coming from the juvenile justice facilities. You can see different combinations here of indicators by category, again, to get a different view. And I'll spend some time here on indicator prevalence. This graph really shows us what are the indicators that are most commonly associated with clear concern screenings. This is, again, no surprise. You see juvenile justice, runaway history, self-destructive behavior, involvement in the child welfare system. These are multi-system involved youth that have typical vulnerabilities or ACEs associated with their childhood experiences. We can sort by age as well to see if the graph changes. I'm going to click the filter at the top here to show you how that changes in just a moment. From age 20 to 24, this graph refreshes and we see instead a different mix of indicators. And I think what's interesting is this is really going to allow us to begin to target different age ranges and populations, to look at a county level, and to be smarter not only about our service delivery, but also our prevention activities that we have as well. We can look at Harris County in particular. And I would say just to note that this is a relatively small data set still, and so we're careful about drawing conclusions prematurely, but it's interesting to see what we're noticing so far. As I click on care coordination and the care coordination dashboard, Andrea mentioned care coordination earlier in her intro, but simply put, this is our way in Texas of making sure that youth who have been identified as clear concern are connected into care and have a multidisciplinary team supporting them through the process. So care coordinators and their teams report out on nearly 100 custom performance measures, and we're pulling that into Lighthouse here so that we can start to see how are youth progressing through care. We're looking at referral sources on this graph, and no surprise, the predominant referral sources into care coordination so far come from law enforcement, juvenile justice, and DFPS. We're looking at essentially 9 quarters worth of data from 10 care coordination teams. So it's a small data set that's relatively limited in terms of our ability to really take long-term insights from this, but we're seeing some early trends emerge. I also want to show you location days in the data as well. Andrea, if we could continue to location days, I think it'll refresh there. There we go. So in addition to referral sources, thanks, Andrea. You can see the total days that youth have been in care coordination. We're not just concerned about where they're coming from or what services we're delivering, but we want to know where they are. We want to keep track of them and understand if we're moving them towards safety. So you can see the different kinds of location days, missing days, detention days, paid days, and unpaid days. And we want to see that trend over time, moving kids away from missing days towards safe paid or unpaid placements. And all of that data is entered directly into Lighthouse by care coordinators and their teams through this portal in this form. So as I wrap the demo, I know I moved quickly there and wasn't able to cover every single feature at length, but we're adding new data into the system each week. We have emerging partnerships with law enforcement, working with Jamie and his team, who you just heard from, to incorporate prevention data, looking at case data as well, and excited about the possibilities to really let Lighthouse inform this greater story of what's happening in Texas. So as we head to the next slide, I want to make sure you all know how to get in touch with some help and resources. You probably know how to be in touch with the child sex trafficking team at the governor's office, but you can see their website. You can be in touch with allies about anything related to Lighthouse, or if you want to have a more in-depth demo and take some time to really digest some of what I showed today, you can reach out at lighthouse@alliesagainstslavery.org or visit our website. And if you have questions that are particular to the See It tool, reach out to the West Coast Children's Clinic via their email and website as well. So I want to say thank you again for your time. You have contact info for Debbie and I on this next slide. And we're grateful for the work that's happening across the state and the part that we get to play in helping to illuminate that and help tell a story of freedom and dignity.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Just wanted to give y'all some perspective too. We were one of the first states to implement Lighthouse as a state, and now we've got 21 states. Using the West Coast Children's tool, the See It tool. First state to use See It. We're definitely the first state to use Lighthouse because it was born and bred here in Texas, and we're very proud of it. But there are 21 states using the See It tool now. And just to give you some perspective, about 120,000 children have been screened so far, and only 10,000 are clear concern. So there seems to be, when people first hear about this, oh, all of our kids are going to be clear concern and have clear indicators of trafficking. And even as you saw from our data, where we're basically screening only those that we see as high risk, about 13% have clear indicators of trafficking, which is really good news that it's not 75. So thank you for that presentation, John. I know you're going to have lots of questions. I'm already seeing them in the chat, and we'll get to those in a second. I want to now turn it over to one of our state's leaders, our commissioner, Jamie Masters of the Department of Family and Protective Services, to talk about one of my favorite projects that we have here on the child sex trafficking team, and in conjunction with our First Lady, Cecilia Abbott. So Commissioner Masters, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning. I'm honored to be with you this morning for the First Spouses Global Summit on Sex Trafficking. First, I want to give thanks to our gracious host, the First Lady of Texas, Cecilia Abbott, and First Lady of Louisiana, Donna Edwards, and all first spouses joined here today in the fight against trafficking. In the last few days, I've been thinking a lot about faith. We all know there is power in faith, more than enough power to counter the evil of trafficking. But we have to bring that power of faith to bear and aim it at the heart of trafficking. During my time as commissioner for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, I have found that faith-based and community engagement work is critical to our success. For many years, we have worked to develop our partnerships with faith-based and communities of all denomination and religious affiliations. That work, often slow and tedious with many setbacks, has paid off. We now have 2,000 faith partners in 305 county communities across Texas. Now that's power. Historically, our faith-based efforts have been designed to promote positive outcomes for children and families and shorten the time children spend in foster care. But of course, those faith-based partnerships are also the perfect tool to use to help destroy the networks of child sex trafficking in Texas. Last year, DFPS was proud to align our faith-based efforts to address trafficking in Texas with Governor Abbott's vision and the First Lady's office under the GRACE initiative. GRACE is the governor's response against child exploitation. GRACE is more than an acronym. It is a real effort designed to improve awareness, increase our capacity to help and treat trafficking victims, and continue pushing our messages to increase the public's awareness of trafficking in Texas. GRACE will empower communities of faith across Texas to meet the needs of children and their families and help put an end to trafficking. Grace envisions every faith community in Texas working collaboratively with the state of Texas and local agencies to help trafficking survivors heal and flourish in their restoration journey, while we continue our state's stellar efforts to protect our most vulnerable. This collaboration will empower leaders of the diverse faith communities in the state of Texas to achieve our shared vision through education, advocacy, prayer, and provision of resources to survivors of human trafficking and those who are vulnerable. From a day of prayer in 2020 to a week of prayer to end human trafficking in 2021, the Grace Initiative strives to bring faith communities across Texas to unite in prayer, become better educated about human trafficking, and discern opportunities to prevent exploitation and support survivors. When we consider the sheer violence and violation of the act of trafficking, it is impossible to not grieve for those affected. But with efforts like Grace, there is hope. Grace as a verb is to do honor or credit by one's presence. Our governor's voice and the First Lady's leadership in Grace demonstrates that presence exemplified in today's summit. It is a privilege to help restore hope to the heart of a survivor, but even greater honor to protect that heart and soul of a young person from ever experiencing trafficking. The power of the Grace Initiative and partnership with faith leaders can achieve both. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We couldn't do this Grace Initiative without your partnership and your leadership. And just want to throw it out there that if any other first spouses are interested in replicating this or learning more about it, I know Mrs. Abbott would be happy to talk to you about it. We just did finish our first week of prayer in Texas and had lots of faith leaders and faith communities join us. We had rabbis and imams and bishops, including Bishop Vasquez, who is here today. So we're very proud of this initiative. So I wanted to also let y'all know, I forgot to mention this earlier, and I thought we could just take a moment to recognize that today, the governor announced today is the Sexual Assault Survivor Day in Texas. And this is a day that the legislature created in 2019 to recognize sexual assault survivors and the extreme courage that they show in helping us in telling their stories and helping us shape what we do with policies and our different programs. And so I just wanted to let y'all know that and think about that as we move forward. We are going to be hearing from one of our wonderful survivor leaders later on in the program. Next, we're going to talk about recover and what that means. Notice we use the word recover and not rescue. Our survivors tell us that using the word rescue seems to kind of not respect their own strength in trying to survive the ordeal that is human trafficking. And so we really listen to what they say, and we've really focused on this word recover, which means once we recognize a victim of trafficking, a survivor of trafficking, we want to give them protective and empowering responses rather than punitive responses, right? We want to meet them where they are, honor their needs. And two of the greatest strategies we have in this prong of the star of our goals come from other states, actually. So I want to put that out there. We didn't just make all this up in Texas. We really focused on learning from other states and stuff that was happening in our own state that was already working when we came on board. So our CSA advocates, which you're going to hear about in a minute, are actually modeled on a Los Angeles program called Saving Innocence. And, you know, of course, we Texified it a little bit, but we learned about the power of advocacy and that relationship aspect through the state of California. And our care coordination teams really came from an idea out of Boston, so out of the state of Massachusetts. So you can see that everything we do in the state of Texas could be based on something else, but we are taking our own spin on it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lindsay Speed from Traffic 911. She is one of our, she's the CEO of one of our CSA advocacy agencies. And right after Lindsay, we'll hear from Helen Browning, who is our care coordinator in the San Antonio area. Thank you, Lindsay.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. Man, you guys have heard a lot of information. Your head is probably spinning. My colleagues talked about all the geeky data that they're smarter than me on, but now I get to pull on your heartstrings a little bit and talk about the direct care and services for the survivors. And this is kind of where the CSAE advocate comes in. And CSAE advocates respond at the point of recovery. And then we're there for the long haul. And so people use advocate and advocacy in a lot of different ways. The way we're using it when we talk about CSAE advocacy is actually an advocate who's in direct contact with a survivor, providing care for them. So go ahead, you can go ahead to the next one. So why CSAE advocacy? This is really important because what we know is that we're all hardwired for connection. But what we also know is research continues to show and illustrate that the vast majority of survivors have experienced abuse, multiple broken relationships, even prior to their victimization. And so we've got to really come at this from a different approach, right? We're not just going to go straight in from a victim who's recovered and plug them into all these services that are currently available in the county. That's important. But what we want to do is have a little bit of a different lens and approach to this that's really, really built from the basis of relationship. And so we know, I mean, gosh, hundreds and hundreds of broken relationships we see. I've been in this field 10 years and working with survivors. It's just, again and again, there are broken relationships in their life. And so how can we come alongside them as a CSAE advocate? And no matter where they are in their journey or what type of service they have a person and a group who's with them throughout. And so this means just kind of building trust like that. And so I want to show you kind of the who and the what. So the who, we know we're talking about child sex trafficking survivors. CSAE advocates serve age 22 and below. Oftentimes it starts out with maybe a 15-year-old who was recovered by law enforcement, but we want to serve them long-term. We want this advocate to be with them all the way through adulthood because we know that's so, so important. And the trust-based factor is really probably part of the special sauce of this. And so if you think about just that trust has been broken. I mean, if you think about a 15-year-old who's been in the life even 30 days, I mean, what we've seen is that it's not uncommon for them to have upwards and probably even more than 50 exploiters or buyers in the course of 1 month of them being trafficked. So imagine the trust of humanity that has been broken over the course of time. We have our work cut out for us to kind of come in and say, hey, I'm your advocate. I want to be here for you. And imagine how hard that is, you know, for them to build trust. And so another unique part about the CSAE advocates is that we are field-based. We're not saying, hey, we have this service at this place, please come to us. Our team goes to them. So the advocates are field-based. And so at the point of recovery, that advocate is in the field. And then long-term, we're meeting them wherever they are in the community or in placement or in treatment to provide services and just to provide connection. And it isn't, and the other important part is that we're not attached to any one system. So we're not DFPS, you know, we're not the Family Protective Services, we're not law enforcement, we're not attached to any one system. And I think that that helps us kind of have longevity in their lives. And the other important part is just that this is provided by really incredible trauma-informed, experienced advocates, a lot of them with lived experience. And so they get to relate to them on just a personal level. And a lot of survivors that we talk to, who we serve, they kind of see the CSAE advocate as like a mixture between a friend, a coach, a mentor, a caseworker, a case manager, you know, all of these different things sort of combined together is this CSAE advocate. And so you can go on to the next one here. How does this work? This may be a little bit overwhelming for you to look at, but I want to start over here on the left and talk about how this looks played out over time. So let's take Dallas, for example, where we are. If Dallas PD recovers a 15-year-old child victim, we'll call her Gloria. So Gloria is recovered by law enforcement or an investigative agency. And what happens is our protocols, which you'll hear about next from care coordination, in this county says the minute a survivor is recovered, an advocate is also called to be dispatched to their location. And so one of our advocates is called, no matter what time of day, 24/7, in the middle of the night sometimes, to go out and to meet that youth where they are. And our goal, again, is to kind of come, and we don't have a badge on. We usually bring a backpack and even food if we can, and just say, hey, I'm here to be with you through this. You know, I'm here for you. And so we do a lot of care and support and safety planning kind of on that initial crisis stage and crisis response stage, where we're accompanying them to the hospital and making sure they've got food, shelter, working with all the multidisciplinary partners to ensure that their voice is heard and that all of this is being done through a trauma-informed lens. And then also just providing them a lot of different options for the future. We may or may not see them again, you know, depending on what happens the next day. And so we want to set them up for success with safety planning and those types of things in that crisis response phase. But as we move on, our goal as a CSA advocate is to build trust, stay connected. And so, I mean, what it looks like today is our advocates are out in the community. Maybe even they could be visiting a girl who's in treatment, or they could be taking a survivor out to lunch to celebrate a mile marker anniversary, or any of these types of things. But we want to stay in their life. They could be in court advocating for them. And another big goal of ours is, I almost see the advocate as sort of like this broker of services, if you will. As we case manage, we know that there's no one size fits all for these clients. And so we want to ensure that we're connected to all kinds of specialized services that make sense for that survivor. So it's very individualized. It's not kind of a one size fits all. We know that doesn't work for survivors. And justice support, supporting them through justice related activities is a really big part, because we know so many of them are involved either in the juvenile justice system or have to testify against their perpetrator. And then in the long term, that looks like just continuing to develop a community of partnerships and wherever they want to build their life after, as they move on kind of from recovery into thriving. And so that's a kind of the short version of what this might look like played out. And then you can go on to the next one. One of the questions we get a lot is, what about all these other professionals and service providers in a survivor's life? We know that there are victim advocates at law enforcement, drop-in centers, the sexual assault advocate that may be at the hospital, prosecutors, victim witness coordinator. I mean, the list goes on, and you all may have heard, I mean, so many different professionals that are in these youth's life. Our goal is not to replicate services. Our goal is to give additional support as a CSA advocate. And so guess what? Maybe when one system is stepping in, we sort of step back, and we are still connected to them, but we're not going to play a case manager role for a while because someone else might be doing it. But we're going to be there throughout and make sure there's all the gaps are filled. If there's ever a kind of a cutoff in services or systems, we want to be there to be supplemental support. We know that these survivors need all the help that they can get, and it takes an entire community wrapping around support. And so that's why we believe the CSA advocate and the relationship they build is so important. So you can go to the next one there. So kind of some interesting pieces about what this looks like played out is, like I mentioned, advocates are available 24/7. So our advocates at Traffic 911 rotate our crisis response phone, and the survivors we serve know, hey, at any time, if you have something going on, you call us, and we want to be there, or we want to help you figure out whatever the next steps are. We have agency approved social media profiles on all the social media platforms that we connect with the survivors we serve. And so a lot of times, even if they run away for a season, they might still be in contact with their advocate. And so it's an amazing opportunity to just be there for them no matter what. And it's very unique to the way this service is provided. Another thing that's unique is that we want to move at the survivor's pace, and this looks different for every survivor we serve. And so even if, let's say, law enforcement recovered a victim and she's sitting in the office or in the forensic interview, and she doesn't want to say a lick, she doesn't want to say one thing, and so she's not interested in cooperating yet with the investigation. Guess what? we're still there. We're not dependent on where the investigation goes. But what's cool is over time, what we've seen, even if they're not ready to make an outcry or something like that, over time, part of our role in their lives as we earn trust with them over time is that they get to see that, man, there's some healthy people out there who I can trust. And so I get to tell Gloria, hey, I know Agent Cochin. He is solid. He is for you. I promise this guy's a good guy. And so I get to help build the rapport sometimes even with law enforcement or other system providers. And then at one point, I mean, I had this happen with a girl I was serving. All of a sudden she was ready. One day she was ready to talk. And so it's amazing to be able to be there with them, no matter kind of where they are, you know, in this process of healing and justice. And we want to maintain contact in the field. And so we're going to go to them. We have some survivors who may be in placement or in treatment in Iowa or Arizona or away from us. And so we're all going to stay together and make sure that we're staying in contact with them. And we know that there are multiple transitions in survivors' life. If I've learned anything over the course of 10 years, I've learned that working with young survivors, there's just transition after transition in their life. They're living one place, they're here, they're there, they end up maybe running away, they're here. So our goal as advocates is just to be there, and just to keep showing up. And it's amazing what happens when you do that over the course of time to build trust and to show them we really are there for them. And so you can go to the next one, Andrea. I know a lot of people kind of want to know, okay, well, but you're saying there's transitions. These youth move around a lot. And so what happens then? And so in Texas, we have CSA advocacy agencies just like us at Traffic 911 placed all over the states, not all the counties yet, but we're getting there, okay? And I think it's 134 out of 254 counties. But what we do is we are this close network of groups. And so I might be calling YMCA of Houston or Common Thread when one of the survivors up here in Dallas ends up moving down to Houston, and we ensure that they're connected and so that there's no drop-in services, there's no gap. And that's what's incredible about the model that the governor's office has put together with the CSA advocates and this network of support that's really trust-based, relational focused all across the state of Texas. And so I could talk to you about it for days. I love what we get to do, but I want to send it over to Helen Browning, or Andrea, you can, I'll send it over to Helen Browning. She is going to tell you more about the actual care coordination, which is like kind of the, I know we call it the air traffic controller of all of this.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I greatly appreciate it. Hello, I'm Helen Browning, the Director of Care Coordination in San Antonio, Texas. This program is the first in the nation and is currently being implemented across Texas to serve youth that are being exploited. The Child Sex Trafficking Team, Office of the Governor, in collaboration with the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas, has developed Survivor Care Coordination. You can go to the next slide. Care coordination is a multidisciplinary approach to the CSA survivor with the service agencies. These agencies include our core multidisciplinary partners in the investigation, along with our CSA advocates like Lindsay, counselors, drop-in centers, substance abuse, immigration, education, and housing. The care coordination team was developed due to the concerns that service providers of minor victims were not communicating well with one another, along with concerns that survivors were being overwhelmed and not knowing what order services should be done, and even duplication of these services. In the big picture, care coordination is the air traffic controller for our youth to navigate all of the available services. It is a collaboration and coordination to reduce the secondary trauma and stress to the survivor. It is a multidisciplinary approach to provide resources, stabilization, empower the youth, and transition them into survivorhood. Care coordination is just not a cooperation or a coordinated response, but a collaboration. When all of our agencies are working together, we help each other achieve our respective goals. In sharing information, we are able to improve service planning, but also the investigation and prosecution of exploiters. We are able to open more doors for our victims than an agency can do just on their own. As a team, we support a trauma-informed response that is child-centered and hold each other accountable in our mission, vision, and values. So care coordination is built out of the child advocacy centers as trafficking is a form of child abuse. The child advocacy centers are already legally authorized to facilitate the investigational multidisciplinary teams and coordinate the delivery of services under the Texas Family Code 264.401. This allows the child advocacy centers to share information with investigational parties. On top of the multidisciplinary team, we are a neutral party in the investigations and services for the youth we serve. Our goal is always a trauma-informed response for the well-being of the youth. We have established relationships with our multidisciplinary partners and all of our community agencies. And the Child Advocacy Center also provides forensic interviews, referrals for safe exams, counseling, and family advocacy services. The eligibility for care coordination is based on the commercial sexual exploitation identification tool that Debbie talked about earlier. All screenings of youth under the age of 18 that are identified as clear concern will be accepted into our program. Slide. Developing care coordination in your community can feel like an overwhelming task. It's important to set these 5 goals to mark your progress. Creating your work group. This stage is marked by identifying your service agencies, developing your community's mission, vision, and values for the youth you will serve, and developing a timeline of implementation. The next is most important is endorsing your CSA advocates. Your CSA advocates are the most important response for your survivor. They are not only a relationship that helps the youth to navigate their path, but also the case manager to help your youth get into services. Developing a protocol, MOU, and universal consent. This stage is the most grueling, as not only are agencies trying to meet the mission, vision, and values of the care coordination team, but they have to understand each other's roles, responsibilities, language, and policy with the services that they can offer. Take time to learn each other's policies and use these to lead your protocol. The advisory council is developed once all the agencies agree on the protocols and MOU. This council is the executive leadership of your agencies and governing body of care coordination. Training the community means establishing a training schedule for all partners prior to launch, and then maintain a training schedule that allows for refreshers and new employee orientations. These trainings will focus on the care coordination process, protocols, and responsibilities of the agencies involved. You can go to the next slide. Care coordination is a coordinated response for the survivor. Care coordinators are not case managers, but partner facing. They provide the oversight and accountability for a youth to obtain services and not fall through the cracks. They work with the CSA advocates to identify the youth's needs and obtain a commitment from a service agency to meet that need. They facilitate case reviews, service meetings, and training of all the community partners regarding trafficking and care coordination. Care coordinators provide data on the community response and demographics of the youth that are identified and served. With this data, we can review trends and patterns in our community and provide support to our partners for prevention, education, and future grant funding. Care coordinators are responsible for facilitation of the advisory council to continuously improve all agencies' response to our youth. Go to the next slide. Care coordination is a series of collaborative meetings that meet the youth where they are and move at their pace. The care coordination program is built with the survivor in mind, and we are aware that our youth may disengage and even run away at times. These meetings are not linear, but will wax and wane depending on the triggers and stages of change. As the meeting progresses, more service providers are invited to attend to meet the youth's needs. Starting with the rapid response meeting, the care coordinator and CSA advocate will attend every meeting. The rapid response meeting is held within 72 hours of a youth being referred. The response time will depend on the current placement of the youth and if they were recovered by law enforcement. The goal of this meeting is to stabilize the youth for the first 10 days to meet their needs and help aid in a criminal investigation if it's occurring. This includes discussing the need for a safe exam, forensic interview, and most importantly, does the youth have a safe place to reside? A child sex trafficking multidisciplinary team meeting is held each month. These meetings will only include youth that have a law enforcement case regarding their trafficking. They include our multidisciplinary partners, These meetings are to allow for the partners to focus on the investigation and hopefully prosecution of the exploiter. Our service status meetings are held between 10 and 20 days after the rapid response meeting. The goal is identifying the highest priority needs, identifying service agencies for the youth to be referred to, and making a service plan. Each plan is tailored to the youth to ensure small victories are obtained prior to the family service meeting. This allows a buy-in from the youth and allows us to build their self-confidence and encourage their empowerment. The family service meetings occur after a youth has been engaged in the program for 45 days and then occur every 60 days thereafter. The family and the youth attend these meetings, and the youth is highly encouraged to speak about their wants, dreams, and needs. The goal of these meetings is to empower the youth in their service plan, identifying ongoing needs for the youth and any needs that their family may have. Transitional meetings are held when a youth is ready to transition to adult services. The youth attend these meetings that start 6 months prior to aging out and occur every 90 days until their goal date. The agencies that provide adult services in the area are invited to present their programs for the youth to be fully aware of what's available to them. They are also held with agencies when a youth disengages in services. We quickly identified a need for a rapid recovery meeting when we launched our care coordination team. These meetings play a vital role when a youth has been identified as a runaway, and we invite local law enforcement missing persons detectives to aid in the recovery of these youth. These meetings are made to locate the youth, help develop a plan to return them safely. Go to the next slide. Oversight in the Advisory Council. They provide the ongoing oversight to care coordination and the care coordination team. The Advisory Council consists of our executive leadership of the key partners and a CSA survivor representative. The Advisory Council is the governing body of the care coordination team. They develop a separate mission, visions, and values from the care coordination team. They ensure the continuous improvement by case autopsies, which is reviewing a case on what worked well, what were the barriers, and how do we resolve these barriers in the future. Along with reviewing data that is submitted to the Office of the Governor, they resolve conflict and hold each other accountable to the mission, vision, and values of care coordination. Next slide. Care coordination in San Antonio launched March of 2020 amid the chaos of the pandemic. We have 21 partner agencies in our care coordination team. Our coordinated response meetings are all held via Zoom, and due to the nature of these meetings, they will most likely be permanently held in that manner. In 2020, we served 154 youth. 44% of our youth are confirmed victims of trafficking. We have held over 200 coordinated response meetings, and our youth attended over 2,700 services. The average age of a youth in our program is 14 and a half. Our majority is 16, but we do have survivors as young as 10. We are predominantly female in our survivors and 93% sex trafficking. Next slide. Care coordination is being implemented across Texas. Currently, we are in all large urban areas, including San Antonio, Houston, Austin, Dallas, and Fort Worth. As care coordination is developed, it not only allows for a local response, but a Texas-sized network of services. Care coordinators can communicate and transfer youth to one another when they move locations, and this allows for a survivor to obtain services wherever they are in Texas. In 2021, we will be extending this partnership to 10 new areas.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen. You know, just one example of the partnership between states so far is that Louisiana is also going to be implementing care coordination. We've been having joint meetings, and so we're learning from each other all the time. And I know Helen's going to spend some time with Louisiana next week, training some of their care coordinators. So we're super excited about that. Okay, and I am so proud of everybody because we are right on time. I did not think that was going to be possible today, but we are doing it. Next, we have our support healing goal. And this, as I said earlier, is a really hard thing to unwrap, but we believe we found the secret ingredient, at least a couple of them. And the first person you're going to hear from is part of the Karen Purvis Institute for Child Development, and she's helping us implement trust-based relational intervention across the state, specifically with programs serving our CSA, commercially sexually exploited youth, as well as those as youth at risk. And she's going to be able to share what that looks like. And then the second person you'll hear from is Tara Rousset, who's the CEO of SJRC, and they are implementing TBRI, have implemented this program within their short-term and long-term residential services. So you can see what that looks like once it's implemented. So just so happy to have them here with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Allie Madison.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to be present with you today and share about our project. So again, my name is Allie Madison, and I am the project director of the CSA project with the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development at TCU. This project is in partnership with the Office of the Governor's Sex Trafficking Team, and we've been working together since 2018 to bring trauma-informed care training and support to those who serve commercially sexually exploited youth, or CSA. We're going to start off with a video that was developed out of this partnership to introduce us today. So I'm going to pass it back. Thank you. Andrea, I'm getting messages that people cannot hear. Andrea, are you still there? Is there a way we can restart the video, perhaps? I'm happy to share a link for sure for you guys to be able to watch. Okay, I think we have someone working on the video.
I'm sorry, you guys. Let's see.
Human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, and forced labor seem a world away. But according to the International Labor Organization, there are more.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, and forced labor seem a world away. But according to the International Labor Organization, there are more slaves at this moment than at any other time in history. UNICEF tells us that of the estimated 40.3 million people subjected to modern slavery and psychological bondage, approximately 70% of those are women and girls, some as young as 6 years old, with abusers who can range from family members and acquaintances to gangs and persons unknown. How is it possible that something so insidious has become widespread? A recent report by the University of Texas at Austin states that in Texas alone, there were almost 80,000 sexually trafficked youths. What methods could possibly allow victims from all walks of life to be exploited and abused in this way, from the most vulnerable and at risk to those from privilege? The process can be one of violence, including kidnapping, or desperation where sex is traded for food, shelter, or necessities for existence. But often, it's a case of careful grooming, identifying a victim by looking for vulnerabilities. Traffickers target victims with emotional neediness, low self-esteem, and those under stress. By gathering information in an interested way, the goal is to create trust and build dependency, while isolating the abused from family and friends. Through phone calls and social media, the trafficker begins slowly, often supplying phones and other devices so that communication can be continuous and undercover. By fulfilling a need, the trafficker strives to become everything to their victim, including becoming the only person they can trust. Often, the dependency building includes gifts, drugs, or alcohol, but sometimes it's simply the fulfilling of a desperate need to be seen. Once trust is established and dependency is complete, control begins. Often there's been nothing asked of the victim until this point, when suddenly the threat of violence and sexual demands leave the victim confused, fearful, and psychologically battered. Sexual exploitation and physical abuse create chronic overstimulation of the brain, as the threat of violence leads the abused to stay on high alert. The true horror is that even rescued survivors have years of recovery ahead, since recovery requires overriding trauma-related neural pathways that years of victimization create. Sadly, any association with the sex industry creates an unforgiving stigma that both shames and blames the victim. Too often, survivors are treated as criminals, as we overlook the process that has created these circumstances and the devastating consequences that can last a lifetime. This must stop. It will take deep understanding and multiple healing strategies in order to help survivors develop needed skills such as self-confidence, problem-solving, and self-regulation. Only in this way can survivors distance themselves from their traffickers, reestablish their identity, and come to believe that they have inherent value.
So this is what we are trying to do. Dr. Cross, co-creator of TBRI, puts it this way. The reason why the trauma caused by commercial sexual exploitation is so deep and difficult to overcome is because it corrupts one of those primary methods humans have to stay healthy and heal from hurts, which is intimate, trusting relationship, making it very difficult for victims to trust and form meaningful relationships, which are essential for healing. So how do we do this? How do we start this healing process? We respond with TBRI, which is trust-based relational intervention. It's an attachment-based, trauma-informed intervention that is designed to meet the complex needs of vulnerable children and adolescents. TBRI uses empowering principles to address physical needs, connecting principles to address attachment needs, and correcting principles to disarm fear-based behaviors. So while the intervention is based on years of attachment and neuroscience research, the core and the heartbeat of TBRI is connection, which means that anybody and everybody can do it. And this is a model that empowers caregivers and others who interact and make decisions on behalf of kids. So residential program staff, child protection workers and investigators, advocates, juvenile probation officers, health providers, teachers, mentors, law enforcement, you name it, to be truly trauma-informed and responsive in their work, there's a way to apply trauma-informed care, and we see TBRI as being one of those tools. A true trauma-informed lens allows for seeing the need behind the behavior and better equipping folks to meet those needs that are behind the behavior and really are just targeted at the root of trauma. Next slide. So how do we empower? We take our trauma and responsive model called TBRI, or trust-based relational intervention, and we train organizations that serve CSA in this model. But as we all know, training is not enough. We have all been to a training that we were excited about, but we returned to our well-known chaos for the training to be left uninternalized and unoperationalized. So the project supports organizations in the implementation process. Essentially, I went to the training, now what? And we walk alongside organizations to break it down step by step and work towards being a trauma responsive organization. The organizations or agencies choose kind of TBRI champions, or folks that are committed to trauma-informed care amongst themselves to become that go-to person within their organization that can continue training and implementation efforts, therefore creating that sustainable culture change that allows for our youth to have the best chance at starting or continuing on their healing journey. So just to give you a snapshot of this journey that organizations in the project take, you can go to the next slide, because I have pictured here in phases. Organizations may attend a free training that we offer to introduce TBRI and how it works well with CSA. This is our exploration phase, if you will. And these agencies may explore what TBRI is, if it's a good fit or a good time for their agency. If an organization chooses to implement trauma-informed care using TBRI, we support them in that journey. And this is where immersion is a great word for this phase, as it often entails that nitty-gritty work on policy change or training, adapting training curriculums. But we often see a light at the end of the tunnel, and we've found even a third phase as we journey with organizations. So after implementing trauma-informed care themselves, they become mentors and models for other organizations walking through the process. So the larger hope is actually an extension of trauma-informed care. If you'll go to the next slide, you can see that what we hope is that trauma responsive care hits every system that may touch a survivor. So we work with organizations that solely serve CSA, like residential treatment centers or specialty survivor advocates, as you've heard Lindsay share about, but we also train and support organizations that might not even know they serve youth who have been trafficked, like schools or CASA workers or juvenile justice facilities. We know that survivors touch a lot of these community service organizations, and the more trauma-informed these agencies are, then the better services, the better identification, and the better prevention we can offer as a community that cares. So I'd like to tell you one story of an organization that we have worked with and their journey in becoming a true trauma-informed organization. Kinder Shelter is an emergency shelter that serves youth in crisis. So I'm going to share this testimony from program manager Clara Thomas. She shares that in 2014, trauma-informed care was introduced to the shelter staff by various agencies in the local community. The shelter went further by investing in a trauma-informed program, which brought a detailed systematic approach, TBRI, in addressing the needs of the youth that we serve. She shares that from October 2018 to January 2019, in that quarter, we had 45 youth to AWOL from the shelter or run away. These were not 45 different youth, but a mixture of the same youth who ran away on multiple occasions. So even over a 10-day period within that 3-month time frame, we had the same 5 youth AWOL as a group. They would leave the shelter around 4:30 and would return sometime between 8:30 and 10. And upon a youth returning, this was the process. They would fill out a questionnaire on why they left and why they returned. Over the next 24 hours, the first and second shift staff would talk to the youth at the shelter about the dangers of running away. And this was not a good practice for 2 reasons, she points out. One, Youth at AWOL will become angry because of the repeated conversation and lecture, and youth who were seeking staff attention within AWOL to just be in the spotlight. The shelter targeted this as a major concern and met with partners from TDRI and implemented the following suggestion. No matter what shift the youth returned, staff would greet them with, "Glad you are back. I hope all is well. And if you want to talk about anything that happened, I'm here. Tomorrow, I will make you an appointment at the clinic to make sure that you are okay." So program manager and team members designed a questionnaire that only 2 staff would discuss with the youth regarding that run. And then there was no more discussion about it, no more rehashing, no more lecturing. And after implementing these steps, Kinder went 45 days with no runaways, no AWOLs. And even after that 45-day period, they had at that time only 3 runs, and 2 by the same young man who was really concerned about his girlfriend not answering her phone. Typical youth there, right? Absolutely makes sense. So if you'll go to the next slide. Oh, actually the next one, sorry about that. I just want to highlight this shift for a minute. So Kindershelter went from a lack of understanding how trauma informs behavior and responded with, "Why did you leave? Why did you come back? Do you know why it is so dangerous to run away?" And they went to trauma informed and understanding that behavior is rooted in survival and needs, and responded with, "Did you feel safe at Kindershelter? What could we have done to help you before you left? Do you have any immediate needs now?" Right? And this is just one example of what they changed, just their intake form. They have so many others I wish I could share today. And we have so many other organizations that are creating sustainable culture change through this project. Trauma-informed and responsive care is essential across systems if we want to give our children and youth the best chance to take that healing journey. So thank you again for letting me share a little bit with you today about that. And I'm going to pass it off to Tara.
Go ahead, Tara. Glad you're here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Tara Rousset, and I am the CEO of SJRC Texas. And what I'm going to talk about today is many of the things that you've been hearing all morning and kind of how it all compiles together to help these youth in a residential facility. So if we'll go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our mission and vision at SJRC. Our mission is to always offer healing and hope to children and families affected by abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Our vision and what we work for every day is that abused and neglected children will be empowered to grow up to be happy, healthy, and caring adults. I'm going to spend the next few minutes with you explaining how, as residential providers, we're able to fulfill that mission and vision and become an essential part of fighting against sex trafficking. Foster youth are especially vulnerable due to their trauma history. Many of these youth do not even have an idea of what a healthy relationship is. So it's on the part of providers to provide them with the tools that it takes, and many of the tools that you've heard today, all together so that they can recognize a healthy environment because they've never been in one. That's not to say that other youth that are not in foster care are not victims of sex trafficking, because they are, and they can be, and they will be. So we kind of work with all of the populations together, but we recognize that foster youth really stand out at a higher percentage to be in that vulnerable population. So there's only a few residential placements across our state of Texas that specialize specifically in caring for trafficking survivors. And in our programs, we have pregnant and parenting teens that are survivors, as well as male survivors. Specifically this morning, I'm going to talk to you about our pregnant and parenting teen process and how we take that family unit and guide them to the road of healing. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our 2020 impact. And our numbers, I will say, look a little low. The reason that they look low compared to some of the other numbers you've heard today is that we have a long-term program. So actually the lower amount of numbers we serve means that they're with us for a longer time so that we can really meet them where they're at and get them on that road to healing. So in 2020, we've served 10 youth who have been confirmed trafficking survivors. And then we also, every youth that comes into our program, we give them the See It tool to identify their needs. So oftentimes these youth do not even know themselves that they are victims. They think that the relationship they were in was one of love, one of respect, because they don't know any different. So through the See It tool, we're able to identify additional 26 youth who scored a clear or possible concern. And so then we're able to give them the tools to help them to not go further in their life and not become further victimized. So with that, we partner with everybody that you've heard from this morning, especially our Office of the Governor, and really we take active role with many care coordination teams across the state. We're located just outside of San Antonio, but we have youth from our entire state of Texas. So in the next slide, we'll go into what our pregnant and parenting teen related services look like for the youth that we care for. We have on-site individual parenting classes through our Parents as Teachers program, evidence-based PAT program that walks alongside these youth and teaches them parenting. Remember, many, if not all of these youth do not come from a background of strong supportive parenting, so it's up to us to teach them that. And then our case managers, they double as birthing partners. So if a youth comes to us that's pregnant and does not yet have their child, our case manager is in with them from the very beginning, from the classes that they take, all the way through childbirth and all the way and staying as long as they can through the hospital and then afterwards. This is where we really realize how vulnerable this population is, in the sense that the most intimate time of their life, giving birth to their child, there is no other safe, healthy adult that's able to be there for the entire duration of the process. That really sets us apart and sets our staff apart as caring, safe adults for these young people. We also have a registered nurse on site, and then we have our Kid Care Center that offers a high scope curriculum. So these babies and toddlers that are born to these mothers that are survivors of sex trafficking have a true opportunity to get their needs met at that level through this high scope curriculum. When our moms are in school or working, our babies and toddlers are taken care of in our on-site facility. So next, we're going to go a little bit into our process. The next slide you can go to is going to show you about our screening and our intake. So what we do from the minute we get our youth, and frankly, we try to do this before we get the youth, as much information as we can get on our kids before they come in is what we take and meet them where they're at from beginning. We don't want it to be a cold kind of just a residential warehousing environment that so many of our kids are used to, right? We start from the beginning with a phone interview before they even come in. We talk to the kids about their goals, their triggers, the rules and expectations of our program, what they want, what they need, how can we help them? If they say their favorite color is blue, when the day they come, we're going to have a basket full of things that are blue for them, right? To just let them see that they're valued and loved, and we're not just another place that is there to provide them a bed. We want to really encourage them to ask questions, to be transparent with what they need, and we're transparent back with what they need, because these youth are walking into a facility. It's a 24-bed facility with kids and staff all over, and we want the expectations to be set up from the beginning so that they're successful. And it's very, very individualized, starting at intake. We complete the caseworker assessment with the referring agency. We do an orientation, copy of our handbook. We have a tour, and then of course we provide everything. And for people that know, it's very, very hard for our youth to understand that their basic needs, because they've never had that. So we're asking those leading questions of what do they need? What do they like? How can we meet them where they're at and help them? So in the next slide, we're going to go into a little bit of what that assessment looks like. Again, every youth is individualized. This is not a cookie cutter approach. We would not be successful if it was a cookie cutter approach. So we have to make sure that we set goals, and we'll go into that a little later, that are based on the individual's needs and strengths and what they ultimately want with their life. So as I mentioned, all of our youth receive the See It tool. They receive psychological and psychiatric screenings. If there's any drug or alcohol needs, they receive non-judgmental screening and help for that. And then all of the youth that are come through as a clear concern, if they don't already have a Traffic 911 or BCFS Common Threads mentor, then we make sure that they get that advocate, because as you heard earlier, that advocate follows them through. They may not stay with us forever. We may just be a stop on their journey, hopefully a safe, healing, loving stop on their journey. But when they move to the next place, we want that consistent adult with them. So if they don't already have that relationship, we make sure that we set that up. Or if they do have that relationship, we make sure that we are partnering with them and reaching back out and re-engaging that relationship. And then of course, every single youth has individualized therapy. You know, some youth may need therapy once a week, some may need it once a day, some may transition to once a month. Again, it really just depends. We do not have a cookie cutter approach for them. And then of course, basic life skills training. We provide how to write, how to balance a checkbook, and do resume building skills, and all of those things that these youth aren't really are trained on through their program, but we make sure that we get those needs to set them up. So on the next slides, we're going to go into kind of what is that secret sauce? What are the secret ingredients? And for me, this is where this boils up into everything you've heard today. And it boils down to authentic relationships and our whole child approach, not a cookie cutter approach. We are a TBRI agency, as you just heard Ali speak. We understand the effects of trauma on the brain. We teach our staff hours and hours of training on that trauma. We understand that there's real physical symptoms of chronic stress. When your stomach hurts, when your arm hurts, your toe hurts, right? Those can be actual symptoms of chronic stress, and we don't just dismiss, we listen to our staff. You'll hear me say throughout this entire presentation, individual, 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 because that is the key. Teaching authentic individual relationships for each youth on their own journey in their different phases of change. We truly believe about nothing about me without me. We don't want to have meetings about a youth without the youth in the room. They are the ultimate deciders of their future and their fate, so they need to have a voice. And I think that took a lot of time for us as an agency, because it frankly is easier to sit and have meetings and plan, right, and get this show on the road without taking the youth's voice in mind. But we don't do that. Now it's the kid is there, the youth is there, they're explaining their needs, and we don't nothing about me without me. We build trust from day one. Unconditional trust with an adult is something that these youth do not have and probably have never had. So they're always looking at us like, but what are you going to need from me? What am I going to need to do for you? And we take that out from the very beginning and have them realize that we are there for them unconditionally with nothing. We need nothing in return, but for them to heal. And again, we do the right thing for each child, even if it's a hard thing to do. So if we have a youth that comes in that, there's no funding for her to get her teeth fixed, well, we're going to reach out and we're going to find those partners that are able to do that. We're not going to worry about the funding. We have support and help for that. We want to worry about the kid and the youth's needs first. So we'll go on the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about how the individual advocacy happens. So again, advocacy is on a micro level, and it's a huge part of building the trust with the youth. We listen to their needs. We have them write dream boards. Dream big. What is it that you want? And really the most humbling thing for me as I've worked through this with these youth is that their dreams are so basic. They just want a safe place. They want someone to love them. They want a family to rely on. And we build out ways that they can get that. Again, we create buy-in with the youth that shows that we're invested in them and their success. We advocate for the mothers who have lost custody of their babies so they can have their kids back. We advocate for youth to use their voice. They have a strong voice. We want them to use it in courts, in service planning, and leadership opportunities. And we advocate for them to what's next. We want them to be able to say where they're going next and how they're going to get there. And then we also advocate for family contact when it's appropriate. So again, always advocating and teaching them how to advocate. And the next slide, we'll talk about generating their benchmarks and their goals and activities. So Andrea, next slide. Oh, well, actually, we'll talk about supporting and importing our direct care staff. Sorry about that. So really and truly, our direct care staff are the key. They are the ingredient to the success. We need the right people in the right place who are here for the right reasons. Our staff could have secondary trauma responses from understanding and listening all day long. So we try to make sure that they are just an integral part. They're seen as the professionals that they are. We offer competitive pay and benefits. We have wellness programs for our staff. We have education and training beyond no other, because again, we want the right people in the right place who are there for the right reasons. We make sure that we screen our staff specifically using TBRI guiding principles so that we know that they are there for the right reasons to help our youth. We give recognition where recognition is due, not only for our kids. If you go in our facility, you'll see on our door, our kids all have positive affirmations to each other from the staff, from each other. And then we do that for the staff. We recognize them. We give kudos, staff of the year. We celebrate anniversaries and birthdays. And we always believe in the mantra, happy staff, happy kids. This is a process together. This is an approach that is two-pronged in both the staff's lives and the youth's lives, so that together we can be successful and raise happy staff, happy kids. Next slide. So again, the measuring the progress and the success. So how do we measure? How do we take all of these pretty shiny things that we're talking about and put them together in a framework of success as residential providers? So again, we have a unique starting point. We meet back with the kids, we set the goals with them, we meet their relational developmental goals, their medical, physical goals, their psychological goals, spiritual goals and needs that they have, educational, and then their transitional plan. So we actually take everything I've just said to you this morning and put it on paper and reassess every quarter. Second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. We reassess this with the Office of the Governor, with their caseworkers, with their mentors, again, with the youth themselves. They know, and the next slide, I believe, is going to show you kind of a one-pager. And one more, Andrea. So on this page right here, this is a kind of a one-pager approach that we have for our youth. I know it's really tiny on here, but I'm happy to share, and my contact information is on the end here, but really kind of each goal, what it looks like, measured by the staff and the residents in feedback forms. We ask them, did you set this goal? Why did you set this goal? How did you meet this goal? And we meet back with them. We identify staff activities. We provide activities for them that we can then measure against. So if we say that we're going to give the youth for a relational goal, they're going to get a mentor. Well, then we're going to look back and we're going to say, did the staff provide the mentor? Did we engage with the mentor throughout the process? And then what was the outcome of that? Was it a successful relationship? Maybe it wasn't for some reason. So then we're going to circle back and we're going to look and see how we could have met that goal better. Education. Just because someone is 15 and a freshman or sophomore in high school does not mean that they are working at a freshman or sophomore level. So we're going to set those goals for them and meet wherever their goal may be. Maybe that goal is to become a proficient reader and reading on a third grade level. But we're going to do everything we can to get them there. We're going to meet the goal. We're going to talk about the activity, and then we're going to assess the outcome. And again, every day, this is a daily thing that we work on, but specifically we go back every first, second, third, and fourth quarter and meet with the staff, meet with the youth, meet with their care coordination teams to make sure that those goals are being met. Individualized with the youth-led, staff follow, and taking everything from that we have learned about the youth in this individualized process. And then with our pregnant and parenting teens, we can't forget that they also have children. So we do these things. We have the young moms lead this kind of activity for their youth, but through parenting classes. If it's infant massage, that they're both learning how to have that healthy touch, healthy bond, really working through those trauma responses so that they don't automatically kind of revert back to the parenting skills that they had, which probably were not the best parenting skills. So we're trying to fix that up front so that they're setting up their family unit. And as an organization, our mission and vision is working with youth that have been abused, abandoned, neglected. One of the things with these survivors, with having the moms and the babies together, that we really, really are proud of, and as part of our secret sauce, is we have a real opportunity, and it is an opportunity to end the cycle of abuse with these young ladies every day, because we have the mom and the baby. We have that unit together. So we can teach them both healthy ways to move forward. And that's what we're trying to do every day with all of the things we've talked about, is in that cycle of abuse, set them up for success in their future and always be here for when they get back. So one of the things, another goal that we look at with the relational goal, and Allie talked about this, is when youth run away, because they will run away. And sometimes as providers, you can think that it's something that you may have done wrong, or they did wrong to leave, but we always welcome them back. And we ask those questions. What can we do to help you be successful? What do you need? It's not a punitive approach. We know with these CSA youth that they are always reaching and looking out, and they're scared, and they're trying to build those relationships. And we make sure that our bond is stronger than the bond that they may have with the trafficker, and more healthy, so that they want to come back and they don't fear that they're going to be punitively punished. They're going to be embraced and welcomed back. So on the next slide, we will wrap up and end what the work that we're doing here, and we'll turn it over to the Justice Department. You kind of see how that goes. So thank you for your time today, and we will have the slides, and we offer the opportunity for anybody to come to our facilities and tour, and so you can see kind of all of these things to work. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tara. Yeah, SJRC is really something to see. So if you're ever in the New Braunfels area, come visit. It's really great to see how they treat survivors and are really making a difference. I wanted to also give y'all a snapshot of where we have other residential programs throughout the state. So we are using that framework and implementing that framework that you saw of all the benchmarks in each of these, and we're doing that work now. It's going to help us see what we're investing in and help our programs see, progress that they're making with the children and the youth, and help their, train their staff and their board to really understand what they're doing in those programs. So we're very excited about that work. Our last part of the STAR, but certainly not the least, is Bring Justice. And for this part, we've got Detective Joe Scaramucci here, as well as Rochelle Cahan, who will be popping in to talk about, these investigations and prosecutions are really difficult for a lot of reasons, but we believe we have a training in Texas and a tool that helps make cases stronger, helps make them bigger, and helps bring best practices into those investigations and prosecutions. So they're going to talk about that tool, and then you're going to hear from Sophia Strother, who is the head of our Survivor Leader Advisory Council. So I'm going to go ahead and get Joe started so we can stay on time. Joe, are you here?
I am. Can you hear me? You got me?
Yes, we hear you.
Perfect. All right. So my name is Joe Scaramucci. I'm an investigator with the Sheriff's Office in Waco, Texas. I'm going to talk briefly over kind of partnering with Collective Liberty as an organization, what we've done with them, and kind of who I am and why all of this ultimately matters with training and with tech tools. So I've been in law enforcement roughly about 17 years now, actually. I've been doing human trafficking investigations since 2014. Prior to that, I actually did cases involving any form of death and child exploitation. So my background's kind of diverse when it comes to this, and it ultimately led to being very, very beneficial in trafficking investigations. So as a department, we investigate all forms of trafficking. So it could be domestic minor, it could be familial, illicit massage, labor trafficking. We do all of those. I also task force with Homeland Security investigations. So we're working operations pretty much all over the country and really assisting with how to build cases that don't require our victims to stand up and outcry about their victimization, or even really have to go through the burdens of testifying in court or doing any of that. One thing I like to tell people is that in all the homicide investigations I've had over the years, not one time have I ever had a victim show up and testify in court. So really taking those same principles and building out a story completely around a victim and telling the story on their behalf is really best practices that we're seeing in the anti-trafficking movement. If you can jump to the next. So just globally, Rochelle has done a ton of work throughout Europe. I'm more situated in the throughout North America and some Asian countries as well. But we've trained together in at least more than 300 jurisdictions throughout the world. Very heavy emphasis, obviously, within the United States. If you can jump to the next. So some of the institutes that we've done are primarily for the ECM funded task forces, the enhanced collaborative model that's funded through DOJ. We did one in California that had multiple people from Los Angeles area, San Francisco PD, New York PD actually flew out there for that one as well. They sent administrators to determine whether or not they wanted to host something similar. Contra Costa, which is a very promising task force right now. We ended up shifting that over to New Jersey, so we obviously crossed to the other side of the US. That one, because of the training we had previously done, NYPD sent their trafficking investigators from every borough within the city. So that was a really solid win, I think, as far as getting them trained. Philly came out there, DC, Fairfax. To highlight a little bit on the Orlando one, we did that with Miami and Fort Lauderdale as well, but we focused with them on their code enforcement and their fire marshal's offices. So using those organizations that we don't really think about to enforce civil statutes and go after traffickers using civil as well. We did that in Orlando, same in Delaware. Alabama, I believe the First Lady of Alabama is on here. That is my absolute favorite task force in the United States. Work a lot with those guys and gals out there. They're absolutely wonderful. We did training with their Alcoholic Beverage Commission as well. So the eyes and ears that are going into a lot of these establishments, really training them up on what to look for. Obviously, if we're going to do anything in Massachusetts, it's going to involve Boston, and then specifically more in Texas. We've done every major city throughout the state. And then Mississippi is another very strong task force. I just came back from out there in December, and they have moved forward on some outstanding cases. That's a very, very strong task force as well. Some of the select agencies that we've worked with are multiple HSI field offices.
Hey, Joe,
yes.
I'm going to skip this slide if that's okay, because we're running behind. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'll speed up too.
All right, tell us what, is this Rochelle's part?
Yes.
It's Rochelle Cahan. I am the founder and CEO of Collective Liberty. And we're so grateful to be able to talk to you all today. So my background is I was a prosecutor in Philadelphia for 6 years, and I tried the first 2 trafficking trials in the state. I became a DA the same year it became an official crime. So needless to say, we didn't have robust data and intelligence or investigation processes, prosecution processes. The judges hadn't ever seen this before. It was new areas of law and evidence arguing, and there were no resources to really help. The more I did these cases, the more I looked for these resources. I also learned that we have almost 18,000 jurisdictions in this country, and they're all struggling in the same way. Many of them not even trying these cases because they didn't know where to start. And that's when I realized we really need a solution to this problem. Not only because it's overwhelming for the prosecutors and the investigators to sit there with such tragic cases and no real path towards investigating them, but also we're really failing victims if that's the status quo. So I started Collective Liberty, and essentially what we're doing is solving these problems and filling these gaps. The biggest gap that we identified is that there is such a woeful underinvestment in technology solutions for law enforcement. Right now, we're manually building these cases and doing these investigations, which is completely inefficient when there are computers doing this for the private sector. So that's basically what we're leveraging on top of all of the trainings that we do. So essentially, the process has been an attempt at automating the manual solutions that we've been doing. So investigators have 100 years of experience doing the manual process, and it's been handed down through every training. Now we're automating it. So our team is current and former investigators, law enforcement, survivors, and service providers. So we have every side of the equation built into this process to figure out what are the best practices for investigations. How do we make sure that the focus is on the offenders, the exploiters, and not on arresting victims? How do we make sure we lift victims up in that process? And so that's what most of the trainings focus on. The technology solutions that we are leveraging and building bring actionable intelligence to the equation. So we're collecting data on a daily basis and consistently analyzing it across the system. And the point of all of that is to create supporting evidence for the law enforcement to build their case and for the prosecutors to argue and articulate that case. So from open source information, partner provided information, and public records, we've collected millions of pieces of data, both on confirmed and suspected people who engage in exploitation and venues where exploitation is happening, to case studies that really build out those best practices, and arrest records and financial transactions that really help identify offenders and bring strong cases. All of that's happening on the back end with sophisticated artificial intelligence and machine learning processes that build connections across data and consistently build and rebuild those connections as we collect new data on a daily basis. But for the investigators, it's really simple. It's basically like the Google of trafficking data, where they just type in the main points of connection, anywhere from a phone number, a name, or an address. And the system spits out to them what the pieces of data are that are connected, both in like Excel format, but also like the visual you see on the screen right now that illustrates the important pieces of information, how they're connected, and a narrative explaining all of that. So it really helps solidify and bring that information to life in ways that we're all doing manually right now. I can't tell you how many times we would cut out pictures and glue it on poster board like a science fair project from 4th grade. And this is really just bringing it to a much more sophisticated 21st century solution. Throughout this process over the past 2 years, we've helped law enforcement arrest over 1,000 traffickers and pass new or improved laws in over 40 jurisdictions. And we've trained over 7,000 officers from 300 agencies in 41 states on all of these best practices. And some of the most important information that we've been able to track from impact is that across those agencies, we saw an increase from 5% to 95% in shifting approach towards connecting survivors to support, treating them like victims and not arresting them. So it's also shifting the culture towards one where we're empowering the victims even when the case is messy, and we're focusing on the true perpetrators. So this is all exciting, this is all great, we're really proud, but the thing that's been the most fantastic about the entire solution is the fact that the law enforcement partners are rolling up their sleeves and helping. So we're really collaborating directly with local and state law enforcement, attorneys general, and governors from multiple states, and really making sure that this solution is helpful across different types of jurisdictions and representative of what they need. Hawaii is of course different from Texas, is of course different from New York, and then the rural jurisdictions in between all need slight variation. So we're making sure that it's representative and responsive, and that wouldn't be possible without that collaboration. So we're really grateful that you all are taking the time to learn more, and we hope that there's room for collaboration with you. Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, Andrea, for the sake of time, can we jump to our contact information, and then I'll just kind of give a brief, like, what does that even mean to us in the field? So here's the thing. How do we target human trafficking right now? What's generally being done is we go out and we arrest a bunch of women for prostitution, and we hope that they'll flip. They don't flip, it doesn't matter. Rinse, wash, repeat. We really accomplish nothing at the end of the day to actually combat trafficking. So what this does is this tool that they have will ultimately go through and it will pull sex ads and it will find all of the information associated with those ads. It finds tons of financial data and it puts it all together and spits out a report. So for me as law enforcement in the field, instead of going out and hoping I'm going to have somebody outcry, what I can do is, as this particular case, and it's funny because both of these brothers are sitting in federal prison right now, we just started with a name and we were able to punch that in, use the data that they had at Collective Liberty, and it ultimately maps all of this out. It leads us to emails, it leads us to other victims, it leads us to other perpetrators in this particular case, and gives an entire model that when we walk out the door to do an operation, we know long beforehand who our key players are and what their involvement is. So I can see all the money getting sent to Don Quell and Octarius Allen in this particular case, and we have that long before we even send text messages or anything like that. I know that Rochelle would be the one to demo this if anybody was interested in it. I would definitely encourage you to reach out to her. If you have any questions about it from the law enforcement lens and what it means for the investigators in your particular states, I would be more than happy to get with anybody on that. So please feel free to reach out to me. I think my contact information is on the next slide, and Rochelle's is as well. It's not on the next slide.
It's not.
I will make sure that it gets sent out.
Yeah, it will. We can put y'all in touch for sure. If
Yeah.
anybody wants to demo or reach out to Joe. Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate
Yeah. And I don't want to take away from Sophia, so definitely let her jump in.
Yeah. So our last presenter of the day is a dear friend and a formidable person who does more during a day than is possible, but she somehow does it. And that is Sophia Strother. Sophia, are you here? There she is. Thank you for being here, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for having me. I am just honored, especially as a survivor, to have this opportunity to lend my voice and represent other survivors in the state of Texas, especially those that are a part of the Human Trafficking Survivor Advisory Council, which I'm representing. Our mission is very clear. We want to be able to review and recommend and develop survivor-informed policies and best practices that address exploitation and human trafficking across the state. We ultimately want to see cultural change and sustainable practices that really enhance a culture to end commercial exploitation and human trafficking. With that being said, one of the things that we like to say is that we've been able to be on the cusp of the statewide initiative that they currently have out for a strategic plan on human trafficking and how to tackle it and getting all of the agencies involved. And we were invited to actually provide a survivor lens on that. And we made various recommendations because we wanted to make sure that it was very thoughtful, but also to ask the people that you're trying to assist and help recover from these various situations. And so with that being said, you can move forward, Andrea. Justice for survivors is so much more than the prosecution. One, we want to have the prosecution because ultimately the only way to really decrease supply is to kill the demand. And in order to kill the demand, a successful prosecution is ultimately necessary, but also remembering that the participation of a survivor in the investigation is very empowering. But often, if people aren't trained properly, can actually re-traumatize survivors and or as a result of fear or the reality that retaliation might be at hand. So again, we define it very differently. We define justice as not only having a prosecution, but the ability to heal and have the resources available to do that, to achieve autonomy, and to then find empowerment, whether it's financial empowerment, to really feel independent and control of our own finances, our own professional careers, our own education, things of that nature. Many of us are stymied from economic freedom because we do have criminal records from crimes that were committed at the hest of our exploiters or in a means to just survive a lot of times, especially moving from juvenile to adult. I personally have the experience as a juvenile of familiar trafficking, to where it was a parent that actually trafficked me. And fortunately, I wasn't caught up in the criminal justice system and I wasn't involved as an adult, but there's so many more that transcend from starting in juvenile justice department, and then they go in past 18. There's not really a whole lot of services available for them. And then they become quote unquote criminals. They don't even have an opportunity to have addressed any of the victimization that took place. Some of us didn't even realize that we were victims to begin with, because it was either out of survival, or again, it's not like you had chains holding us down. It was a mental chain that was there. So being able to break that cycle is very, very important. So again, knowing that those sentences vary widely depending on the criminal justice system that they're in, victim restitution is not common enough, and it needs to be. A study found by the Department of Justice, Bending Towards Justice, that perceptions of justice among human trafficking survivors relies on kind of a semi-structured interview data collected with about 80 survivors and 100 social services and stakeholders across 8 diverse sites. Again, a lot of times we're not looked at as the victims, and being able to have a shift to know that a lot of things we are coerced in or we fear retaliation is vital, so that again, we can go beyond that. So being able to stress the importance of holding traffickers accountable is so very important, as well as those that are buyers. So it's one thing to just have it to where you have those that are trafficking and recruiting, but also those that are buying the services need to be held accountable as well. Immigration assistance, family reunification, relocation, stable housing, all of those conduit of services that are necessary. And again, every survivor is not the same. The duration of time that they're needing services are not the same, but having that flexibility and realizing that and hearing their voice, knowing that for them, it's about how do I recover and reclaim my identity in my life. So shifting the norms in Texas is very, very important. And again, we are very excited about what Governor Abbott and Cecilia Abbott are really having at the forefront of this. Again, a grant funded example of this is Project 180 in Harris County. It's a post-arrest diversion program for prostitution. Found at least 70% of prostitution cases where defendants were ages 18 to 24 actually showed evidence of being trafficked. 70%, that's an astronomical amount of a percentage to show that, again, a lot of these times, it's not something that someone just wakes up and say, you know what, let me just go out here and allow myself to be sold. A lot of times there is that means of trafficking that is taking place. With Project 180, it reduced the criminal sanctions for those defendants and helped them connect to community-based services, which is so vitally important because they are far and few between when it comes to really identifying those that can specifically help those that have been trafficked, not just domestic violence and not just sexual assault, but trafficked. Project 180 is being phased out, and a pre-arrest diversion program is being funded and expanded to nearby counties, which that is so vital. Again, going from post-arrest to also, okay, how do we then make it to where we don't even have to get into this realm of post? We can hit this before the arrest takes place, before the criminality is attached to the victim. Next. So 2 new procedures in Texas, the orders of non-disclosure. In 2019, a new law expanded eligibility and streamlined processes for survivors to obtain court orders that prohibit public entities from disclosing their criminal records in regards to prostitution and then low-level nonviolent crimes. Again, this is a huge step in the right direction so that, again, as a survivor is trying to move forward with their lives, especially when it comes to the economic empowerment, which is so crucial, they will have at least one less barrier that they have to contend with when it comes to their criminal record and securing a job or moving forward, even in education or even in housing. And then we have the Clemency Project. In 2020, a new clemency application process that allows survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence to provide information to the Board of Pardons and Paroles about how they were victimized and how that attributed to their criminal record, which again, that's just another form of allowing our voice and our stories to be told and a fuller picture to be at hand. And I also want to talk about briefly, they also have in conjunction the Lone Star Project, which they're actually providing pro bono lawyers to assist, which that is even beyond just having that opportunity, helping with that documentation so that it can be done properly and in an expedited manner. So we do have various different options here in Texas to help those that can move beyond the conviction and get some relief in regards to that.
Thank you, Sophia, for that. I'm just so proud of our panelists today and all the information that you shared and that you stayed on time, even with 1 minute to spare. So I want to introduce next First Lady Edwards again to give us some closing remarks. And this is an special honor for me because many of y'all probably don't know, but I'm actually born and bred in Louisiana and came to Texas after, during law school, but grew up in Louisiana. So this just makes me so happy that our states are collaborating, and with all the other states and first ladies out there, we're just very, very excited to collaborate.
Thank you so much, Andrea. What a wonderful morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, good. And thank you, Sophia, for your courage and for being a voice for survivors of human trafficking. It's so important, and just so proud to have heard your remarks, and we thank you for that. And thank you to First Lady Abbott and her staff, for each of the speakers and the panelists on this such a great presentation today, and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. It just has been remarkable. And thank you to each of our first spouses who were able to be with us today. I know not all of you were able to stay on the whole time, but I appreciate, because your leadership does matter. And thank you to the 250 plus participants who joined us today. And I'd like to challenge you to a call to action. Let's each of us today reach out to the states that border ours and invite them to attend our next summit in May. And by continuing to connect, we will surely make an impact on the lives of these that are trafficked. Today, we're excited to announce the formation of a new official organization, which will allow us to connect on a national level and further support our efforts to collaborate. So we're also in talks about meeting in person as soon as it is safe to do so. And there's so many great ideas that we shared in this group today, and it's been so informative. I know I took a lot of notes, and I'm sure many of you did also. If this is your first time hearing about TBRI, please take time to learn more about this important intervention. As a former educator, it matters to know more about TBRI with human trafficking, foster care, and so many other issues. Look for an announcement soon containing our the new name and logo of the National Collaboration of Human Sex Trafficking. Our staff is available, Texas staff is available. And like the gentleman mentioned, so many other states, Alabama, Mississippi, so many more are doing so much great work. And so we want to start collaborating and bringing all this information together. So we started on my website, louisianafirstfoundation.com/anti-human trafficking, an interactive map. So we're hoping that you will go there, and there'll be a survey that'll be sent to you, a link that you can just start adding things to your map, your state, so that we can start sharing and having information that we can reach across to one another and up. And there's so many people that were on it representing Australia. Thank you so much, Sonia Ryan, for being a part of this, from Hawaii to Rome. It's just been a great summit. We look forward to May, and I look forward to seeing you all, and look for some emails that are going to be coming your way. Look for them and take the initiative to fill them out, the surveys. Thanks again to Texas, Andrea, First Lady Abbott, and all those involved in today's summit. God bless each and every one of you, and please stay healthy and safe. Take care.